The Montana winter of 1877 showed no mercy to those who dared challenge its domain. Snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, transforming the landscape into a treacherous white wasteland. The howling wind carried ice crystals that stung like needles against any exposed skin, while the temperature plummeted well below freezing as dusk approached. In the midst of this unforgiving blizzard, a small horse-drawn wagon struggled forward. Its wheels creaked and groaned against the mounting snow, the tired mare pulling it, breathing heavily, her breath crystallizing in the frigid air. Inside the wagon, Eleanor Morgan clutched her 5-year-old daughter Sarah tightly against her chest, wrapping their single woolen blanket around them both. "Just a little further, darling," Eleanor whispered, her lips trembling from the cold. "Redemption Creek should be just beyond that ridge." Sarah didn't respond. The child had grown worryingly quiet over the past hour, her small body shivering despite their shared warmth. Her chestnut curls peeked out from beneath a knitted cap, her usually rosy cheeks now pale against the gathering darkness. Eleanor felt fear rising in her throat. Their food had run out that morning. The water in their canteen was half frozen. The promised town of Redemption Creek, where her distant relative Rebecca Foster awaited their arrival with the teaching position that represented their last hope, remained frustratingly out of reach. A sudden jolt rocked the wagon as the right wheel sank into a hidden ditch. The mare whinnied in distress, struggling to pull them free. Eleanor set Sarah down gently on the bench. "Stay here under the blanket. I need to check on Penny." Stepping out into the punishing cold, Eleanor's worn boots sank ankle-deep into the snow. She made her way to the front, her heart sinking as she saw Penny's leg bleeding where she had strained against the harness. The wagon was firmly stuck, one wheel nearly buried in snow and ice. "Oh, Penny," she murmured, stroking the mare's neck. "What are we going to do?" As if in answer, the wind shifted momentarily, parting the curtain of falling snow. In that brief clearing, Eleanor glimpsed lights in the distance, not the clustered glow of a town, but the warm yellow illumination of a single farmhouse, perhaps half a mile away. Hope flickered within her chest. If she could reach that house, find help, the decision was made in an instant. Eleanor returned to the wagon, gathering Sarah into her arms. "We're going to walk a little way, sweetheart. There's a house nearby. We'll find help there." Sarah nodded weakly, her small face nearly buried in her mother's coat. Eleanor secured their most precious belongings. The teaching certificate, her late husband's pocket watch, and the small rag doll that Sarah refused to be separated from into a satchel, then wrapped them both in the blanket as best she could. "Penny, I'll come back for you," she promised the mare, giving her one last pat before turning toward the distant lights. Each step was agony. The snow reached mid-calf, sometimes higher, and the wind seemed determined to push them back. Eleanor's lungs burned from the cold air, her arms aching from carrying Sarah. But the light in the distance drew her forward, a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. 20 minutes of struggling through the snow felt like hours. Sarah had grown alarmingly still in her arms. Eleanor's vision blurred, exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her. The light seemed no closer, as if taunting her with false hope. "Please," she whispered to no one in particular, "please help us." The world tilted suddenly. Eleanor stumbled, her knees giving way beneath her. As she fell forward into the snow, she twisted to protect Sarah from the impact. The cold enveloped them like an icy shroud. "I'm sorry, William," she murmured, thinking of her husband's face as darkness began to claim her consciousness. "I tried." Through the haze of approaching unconsciousness, Eleanor thought she heard voices, the crunch of approaching footsteps in the snow. Strong arms lifted her and Sarah from their icy bed. A deep voice, steady and authoritative, issued commands she couldn't quite understand. Then darkness claimed her entirely. Warmth. That was Eleanor's first conscious sensation. Blessed, wonderful warmth surrounding her like an embrace. She stirred slowly, her mind gradually piecing together fragmented memories, the blizzard, the stuck wagon carrying Sarah through the snow. Sarah Eleanor's eyes flew open, panic surging through her body as she tried to sit up. Pain shot through her limbs, her muscles protesting the sudden movement. She found herself in an unfamiliar bed in a room lit by the golden glow of a fire crackling in a stone hearth. "Easy now," came a deep voice from beside her. "You're safe." Eleanor turned toward the sound. A man sat in a wooden chair near the bed watching her with careful green eyes. He was tall, even-seated, broad-shouldered, with dark hair threaded with premature silver at the temples. His face was weathered by sun and wind, suggesting long days spent outdoors, but his hands, currently folded in his lap, were surprisingly elegant. "My daughter," Eleanor croaked, her throat painfully dry. "Where is Sarah?" The man reached for a pitcher on the nightstand, pouring water into a cup, which he offered to her. "Your daughter is sleeping in the next room. She's safe, though she'll need time to recover fully. You were both nearly frozen when I found you." Eleanor accepted the water gratefully, taking small sips as relief flooded through her. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved our lives." The man nodded once, his expression revealing little. "Nathaniel Hayes," he introduced himself. "This is Evergreen Ranch. You're about 3 miles from Redemption Creek." "Eleanor Morgan," she replied. We were trying to reach the town. I'm to be the new school teacher." Something flickered in Nathaniel's eyes, surprise, perhaps recognition, but it disappeared so quickly, Eleanor thought she might have imagined it. "Rebecca Foster's relation," he stated rather than asked. "She mentioned you'd be arriving." "Yes, she's my mother's cousin. She wrote that the position was available and—" Eleanor trailed off, suddenly aware of how much she was revealing to this stranger. Nathaniel seemed to sense her hesitation. "Rest now," he said, rising from his chair. "Martha will bring you something to eat shortly. Your daughter has already had some broth. We can discuss your journey to town tomorrow when the storm has passed." He moved toward the door, his movements precise and controlled. "Mr. Hayes," Eleanor called after him. "Our wagon and the horse Penny. She was injured." Nathaniel paused at the doorway. "I've sent men to retrieve your belongings. The mare is in my stable being tended to. Her leg isn't badly damaged." "Thank you," Eleanor said, again overcome with gratitude. "I don't know how I'll repay your kindness." Nathaniel's expression remained impassive. "There's no debt. Anyone would have done the same." With that, he left, closing the door softly behind him. Eleanor sank back against the pillows, exhaustion reclaiming her, despite her concern for Sarah. Her last thought before sleep overtook her again was that Nathaniel Hayes didn't strike her as a man who believed anyone would have done the same at all. Morning brought clarity and renewed worry. Eleanor woke to find clean clothes laid out for her, a simple dress that was slightly too large but warm and well made. After dressing, she immediately went to the adjoining room where she found Sarah still sleeping, her small face peaceful against the pillow. The child's cheeks had regained some color, and her breathing was deep and regular. Eleanor knelt beside the bed, gently stroking her daughter's hair. Sarah stirred her eyes, fluttering open those same hazel eyes that were so like William's, it sometimes hurt to look at them. "Mama," Sarah whispered. "I'm here, darling," Eleanor replied, smiling through the tears that threatened. "We're safe now." Sarah's gaze traveled around the unfamiliar room. "Where are we?" At a kind man's house, Mr. Hayes found us in the snow and brought us here to get warm. How do you feel?" Sarah considered this with the seriousness only a 5-year-old could muster. "My fingers hurt, and I'm hungry." Eleanor laughed softly, relief washing over her. If Sarah was hungry, she would be all right. A knock at the door interrupted them. An older woman with silver-streaked dark hair and a kind face entered carrying a tray. "Good morning," she greeted them warmly. "I'm Martha Sullivan, Dr. Hayes's housekeeper. I've brought breakfast for you both." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Doctor—" Martha set the tray down on a small table. "Oh, he doesn't use the title much these days. Prefers to be called Mr. Hayes now." She lowered her voice slightly. "But old habits die hard for those of us who've known him a long while." As Martha helped Sarah sit up and arranged pillows behind her, Eleanor processed this new information. A doctor who no longer wished to be addressed as such, there was a story there, certainly. "The food smells wonderful," Eleanor said, changing the subject. "You're very kind." "It's good to have guests," Martha replied, her eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. "This house could use more life in it." She turned to Sarah. "And what a pretty young lady you are. Those curls remind me of my granddaughter." Sarah offered a small, shy smile, the first Eleanor had seen in weeks. Something inside her chest loosened at the sight. "Mr. Hayes said we're close to Redemption Creek," Eleanor asked. Martha nodded. "Just 3 miles. The road should be passable by midday once the men have cleared it. Mr. Hayes has already sent word to Rebecca that you're safe." Relief flooded through Eleanor. At least Rebecca wouldn't be worrying. After breakfast, while Sarah rested, Eleanor ventured downstairs. The house was larger than she'd initially thought, a solid 2-story structure built of timber and stone, with wide hallways and high ceilings. It spoke of prosperity and permanence, a stark contrast to the temporary lodgings and boarding houses she and Sarah had inhabited since William's death. She found Nathaniel in what appeared to be a study, standing near a large window that overlooked snow-covered fields and distant mountains. He turned as she entered, closing the book he'd been holding. "Mrs. Morgan," he acknowledged. "You're looking better this morning." "Thanks to your care," she replied. "And please, call me Eleanor." Nathaniel nodded once, setting the book on his desk. Up close, in the clear daylight, Eleanor could better observe her rescuer. He was perhaps in his mid-30s, with the kind of face that seemed more suited to contemplation than conversation. There was a gravity to him, a sense of contained energy, that made his stillness seem deliberate, rather than natural. "Your daughter," he asked. "Recovering well. Thank you for asking." Eleanor hesitated, then added, "Your housekeeper referred to you as doctor. You have medical training." Something closed in Nathaniel's expression. "I was a surgeon during the war. That life is behind me now." The finality in his tone discouraged further questions, though Eleanor couldn't help but wonder what had caused a trained doctor to abandon his profession for ranching in the Montana wilderness. "Martha tells me the road to town should be clear by midday," she said instead. "Yes, I'll have the wagon ready to take you to Rebecca's." He paused, studying her. "The teaching position at Redemption Creek is challenging. The school building is old, resources limited. Many children attend sporadically due to farm duties." Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "I'm aware of the difficulties, Mr. Hayes. I taught in a similar situation in St. Louis before—" She trailed off, unwilling to speak of William's death. "I'm prepared for the work." Nathaniel's gaze remained steady, assessing. "I've no doubt of your capabilities, Mrs. Morgan. I merely wish to ensure you understand what awaits you." There was something in his tone, not condescension exactly, but a certainty that suggested he knew more than he was saying. Before Eleanor could question him further, Martha appeared at the doorway. "Mr. Hayes, the men have returned with Mrs. Morgan's belongings, and your presence is requested in the barn, something about the new foal." Nathaniel nodded. "Excuse me," he said to Eleanor. "Please make yourself comfortable. I'll arrange for your transportation to town after lunch." As he left, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that Nathaniel Hayes was more than he appeared, and that he knew more about her than he should. The thought was unsettling, yet she found herself inexplicably drawn to the mystery of the man who had saved their lives. Rebecca Foster's boarding house sat on the quieter end of Redemption Creek's main street. A two-story clapboard structure painted a weathered blue with white trim. It wasn't grand, but it looked well-maintained with curtains in the windows and a small garden out front now dormant under the winter snow. As Nathaniel's wagon approached, the front door swung open. A plump woman in her 50s with graying blonde hair hurried out, not bothering with a coat despite the cold. "Eleanor, thank the Lord," she called, rushing toward them as the wagon came to a stop. "When you didn't arrive yesterday, I feared the worst." Eleanor smiled at the familiar face. Rebecca had visited their family in St. Louis years ago, though Sarah had been too young to remember. "We were caught in the storm. If not for Mr. Hayes, I don't know what would have happened." Rebecca turned her attention to Nathaniel, who was helping Sarah down from the wagon. "Nathaniel Hayes saving strays again," she said, but her tone was warm, almost teasing. The town's guardian angel, though he'd deny it fiercely. Nathaniel's expression remained impassive. "Just fortunate timing, Rebecca," he replied. "Eleanor's belongings are in the back. I'll have them brought in." As he instructed his ranch hand about the trunks, Rebecca enveloped Eleanor in a hug, then knelt to Sarah's level. "And you must be Sarah. My, what a beautiful young lady you've become. The last time I saw you, you were just a tiny baby." Sarah regarded Rebecca solemnly, clutching her rag doll to her chest, the one possession she had refused to let out of her sight since William's death. She didn't respond, but she didn't shrink away either, which Eleanor counted as progress. "Come inside, both of you," Rebecca urged. "You must be exhausted, and I've got a hot meal waiting. Nathaniel, you'll join us." Nathaniel, who had finished directing his men, shook his head. "Another time, perhaps. I need to return to the ranch." Rebecca looked disappointed but unsurprised. "Well, you're always welcome, and thank you for bringing them safely to me." He tipped his hat, his eyes briefly meeting Eleanor's. "Good day, Mrs. Morgan. Miss Sarah." Then, with practiced efficiency, he mounted his horse and rode away, his figure soon disappearing down the snowy street. Rebecca watched him go, a thoughtful expression on her face. "That man," she sighed, "carries the weight of the world on his shoulders and won't let anyone help him bear it." She turned back to Eleanor with a smile. "But come, let's get you settled. We have much to catch up on." The interior of the boarding house was modest but clean, with a small parlor dining room and kitchen on the first floor. Rebecca led them upstairs to a room at the back of the house with two narrow beds, a washstand, and a window overlooking what would be a small vegetable garden in warmer months. "It's not much," Rebecca apologized, "but it's warm and private." "It's perfect," Eleanor assured her, setting down Sarah's doll on one of the beds. After months on the road, sleeping in wagons or cheap lodgings, this room felt like luxury. As Sarah explored the room, Rebecca lowered her voice. "Eleanor, I don't want to pry, but your letter was rather vague about William's passing. Consumption, you said." Eleanor felt the familiar tightness in her chest whenever William's death was mentioned. The lie had become easier to tell over time, but never easy. "Yes," she replied quietly. "It was quick, at least. A mercy." Rebecca squeezed her hand sympathetically. I'm so sorry, my dear, but you're here now and you can make a new start. The school board is eager to meet you. They've been without a teacher since autumn, when Miss Winters left to marry a cattle baron in Wyoming. Eleanor seized the opportunity to change the subject. Tell me about the school. Mr. Hayes mentioned it might be challenging. Rebecca's expression turned wry. Nathaniel Hayes would know. He's been silently funding improvements there for years, though he'd be mortified if anyone mentioned it. She sighed. The building is old, the books few and outdated. The children range from 6 to 16 with widely varying levels of education. Many of the farm children attend only in winter, when fields don't need tending. And the town, the families. Good people mostly, Rebecca said carefully. Though like any small town, there are factions and feuds. The Blackwoods hold considerable influence. George is the mayor, owns the largest mercantile, and recently started a mining operation north of town. His wife Judith fancies herself the arbiter of propriety in Redemption Creek. Something in Rebecca's tone suggested caution. Eleanor had lived in enough places to recognize the warning tread carefully around the local powers. And Mr. Hayes, what's his standing in the community? Rebecca's eyes twinkled with interest at the question. Nathaniel keeps to himself mostly. Evergreen Ranch is the largest property in the county, highly successful with both cattle and horses. He employs 12 men year-round, more during roundup. People respect him for his business acumen and fairness, though many find him remote. She hesitated, then added, "There's more to his story, of course. 7 years ago he lost his wife, Caroline, and their infant son to scarlet fever. He was a doctor, then couldn't save them despite his skills. After their deaths, he left his practice in Helena, bought the ranch, and rarely speaks of his previous life." Eleanor felt a pang of sympathy, so they shared that in common grief that had altered the course of their lives. "He seems a good man," she said simply. "The best," Rebecca agreed, "though he'd be the first to deny it." She straightened her tone, brightening. "Now, let's get you both something to eat and then rest. Tomorrow we can visit the school, and you can meet Mayor Blackwood to discuss your position." As Rebecca bustled out to prepare their meal, Eleanor sat beside Sarah on the bed. The child was unusually quiet, staring out the window at the snow-covered street below. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" Eleanor asked gently. Sarah turned those solemn hazel eyes toward her. "Will we stay here for always now?" The question carried the weight of their many moves over the past 18 months, the uncertainty that had become Sarah's only constant. Eleanor drew her daughter close. "Yes, Sarah. This is our new home. We're going to stay." Sarah nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. But as she returned to looking out the window, Eleanor wondered if she'd just made a promise she couldn't keep. Their welcome in Redemption Creek would depend on many factors, including how well she could maintain the fiction about William's death. Some truths were too painful to share, especially in a small town where gossip could destroy reputations overnight. No one could know that William Morgan, once a respected businessman, had taken his own life after gambling away their savings and accruing devastating debts. That final selfish act had left Eleanor and Sarah not only grieving, but destitute and shamed. No, Eleanor thought firmly. That truth would remain buried just like William himself. Here in Redemption Creek, they would begin anew. No one would ever need to know. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Eleanor dressed Sarah in her best dress, a blue calico, with only one small patch at the elbow, and tied her dark curls back with a matching ribbon. For herself, Eleanor chose her navy Sunday dress and pinned her honey-blonde hair into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. "Remember your manners in church," Eleanor reminded Sarah as they walked with Rebecca the short distance to the white clapboard building at the edge of town. And stay close to me. The church was nearly full when they arrived. Eleanor felt numerous curious gazes upon them as they slipped into a pew near the back. Rebecca nodded and smiled to various acquaintances, occasionally leaning over to whisper names to Eleanor. As the service began, Eleanor noticed Nathaniel Hayes sitting several rows ahead with a group of men she assumed were his ranch hands. Unlike their first meeting, he was now impeccably dressed in a dark suit that contrasted with the weathered faces and rougher clothing of most male parishioners. He sat straight-backed and attentive, but somehow apart an island of solitude even in the crowded church. After the service, many townspeople approached to introduce themselves, particularly parents of school-age children. Eleanor did her best to remember names and faces, knowing these would be important relationships in her new community. "Mrs. Morgan," a booming voice called. A balding man with mutton-chop sideburns and an expansive waistcoat stretched across his round belly approached a thin woman with pinched features and a boy about 8 years old in tow. "George Blackwood, mayor of our fine town. This is my wife Judith and our son Oliver." "Mayor Blackwood," Eleanor acknowledged with a polite smile, "it's a pleasure to meet you all. I look forward to discussing the teaching position." Judith Blackwood assessed Eleanor with barely concealed judgment. "We were quite concerned about finding a suitable teacher. Children need proper guidance, especially in moral matters." The emphasis on moral wasn't lost on Eleanor. She kept her expression pleasant. "I assure you, Mrs. Blackwood, moral development is as important to me as academic progress." "And your daughter?" Judith's gaze shifted to Sarah, who was half hidden behind Eleanor's skirts. "She'll be attending the school as well." "Yes, though she's young yet. She'll start with basic lessons." Oliver Blackwood, a boy with his father's stocky build and his mother's sharp features, peered around his mother to get a better look at Sarah. "Where's your pa?" he asked bluntly. Sarah's fingers tightened on Eleanor's skirt. Eleanor placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Sarah's father passed away last year," she said calmly, though her heart raced. "We've come to Redemption Creek for a fresh start." "Oh, how unfortunate," Judith said, though her tone suggested more curiosity than sympathy. "Consumption, wasn't it?" Rebecca mentioned something of the sort. Eleanor nodded, maintaining her composure. "Yes, it was a difficult time." "No father," Oliver stated, rather than asked, his young face screwed up in confusion. "That's strange. Everyone has a father." "Oliver," George admonished half-heartedly, "mind your manners." But the boy continued, emboldened by the attention of nearby adults. "My mother says children need a father to grow up proper. Does that mean you won't grow up proper?" Sarah's lower lip trembled, and Eleanor felt anger rising within her. Before she could respond, a deep voice spoke from behind them. "That's quite enough, young man." Nathaniel Hayes had approached silently, his tall figure now standing beside Eleanor. His expression was stern but not unkind as he looked at Oliver. "A person's character isn't measured by who their parents are, but by how they treat others, especially those who might be going through hard times." Oliver shuffled his feet, his bravado deflating under Nathaniel's steady gaze. "Sorry, sir," he mumbled. Nathaniel then did something that surprised everyone. He knelt down to Sarah's eye level, his movements deliberate and gentle. "Mr. he said, his voice softer than Eleanor had heard it before. "Don't you worry about what anyone says. You are not alone here. You have your mother who loves you very much. You have Miss Rebecca, who is so happy you've come to live in her home. And you have me, if you ever need anything at all." Sarah regarded him solemnly, her hazel eyes wide. She didn't speak, but she didn't hide further behind Eleanor either, a small victory that made Eleanor's heart swell with gratitude. Nathaniel rose, his gaze briefly meeting Eleanor's. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared understanding, perhaps. Then he turned to the Blackwoods. "Mayor Mrs. Blackwood," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "If you'll excuse us, I believe Rebecca was hoping to introduce Mrs. Morgan to Reverend Parker before he leaves." Without waiting for a response, Nathaniel gently guided Eleanor and Sarah away from the Blackwoods, his hand briefly touching the small of Eleanor's back. A gesture so subtle it might have gone unnoticed, yet Eleanor felt its warmth through the fabric of her dress. "Thank you," she murmured as they moved through the crowd. Nathaniel's expression remained impassive. "No thanks necessary." The boy was out of line. "Still, you didn't have to intervene." He glanced down at her, something flickering in his green eyes. "Perhaps not, but I've found that standing by while injustice occurs, however small, makes one complicit in it." They had reached Rebecca, who was chatting with an elderly gentleman near the church steps. She raised an eyebrow at their approach, but made no comment on Nathaniel's unexpected escort. "Ah, Eleanor, here is someone you should meet. Reverend Parker. This is our new school teacher, Eleanor Morgan, and her daughter Sarah." As introductions were made, Eleanor was acutely aware of Nathaniel standing quietly beside her, his tall figure like a shield between her small family and the curious, sometimes judgmental gazes of the townspeople. It was a strange feeling, both comforting and unsettling, to have someone else standing protectively close after so many months of facing the world alone. When they finally parted ways outside the church, Nathaniel tipped his hat to her. "Mrs. Morgan, if you need anything at all for the school, please don't hesitate to ask. Evergreen Ranch has resources that might be useful." "You're very kind, Mr. Hayes," Eleanor replied, "but we've imposed on your generosity enough already." "It's not imposition to help one's neighbors," he said simply. His gaze dropped to Sarah. "And Miss Sarah, perhaps, when the weather warms, you might like to visit the ranch again. We have a gentle mare named Daisy who loves children, and several new kittens in the barn." Sarah's eyes widened with interest, the most animation Eleanor had seen from her in weeks. She didn't speak, but she nodded eagerly. Nathaniel's mouth curved in the barest suggestion of a smile, the first Eleanor had seen from him. It transformed his serious face, softening the lines around his eyes, and revealing a glimpse of a different man than the remote guarded rancher she'd met. "Good day, then," he said, touching his hat brim once more before walking toward his waiting horse. Rebecca watched him go, then turned to Eleanor with a knowing look. "Well, well," she said softly. "I don't think I've seen Nathaniel Hayes voluntarily engage in social conversation at church well, ever." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "He was simply being kind. After rescuing us, he probably feels some responsibility." Rebecca hummed non-committally. "Nathaniel Hayes doesn't do anything out of mere obligation, my dear. Remember that." As they walked back to the boarding house, Eleanor found herself dwelling on Nathaniel's unexpected defense of Sarah, the gentle way he'd spoken to her, the brief transformative smile. For a man who seemed determined to keep the world at arm's length, his actions suggested a capacity for compassion that belied his reserved demeanor. She wondered what other contradictions lay beneath the surface of Redemption Creek's most mysterious resident. Monday morning found Eleanor standing nervously before the schoolhouse, a simple rectangular building with a small bell tower atop the pitched roof. 6 windows along each side provided ample light to the single large room filled with wooden desks arranged in rows. A pot-bellied stove stood in one corner, and a large chalkboard dominated the front wall. Though dusty from disuse over the winter break, Eleanor could immediately see the building's potential. The teachers' quarters behind the school, a small cabin with a main room, bedroom, and lean-to kitchen, would provide them privacy and independence once the school board officially confirmed her position. Sarah stood beside her, clutching her mother's hand tightly as they surveyed what would be their new domain. "What do you think?" Eleanor asked, squeezing her daughter's small fingers. Sarah tilted her head, considering the building with the seriousness only a child could muster for such a question. "It's big," she finally said. "Bigger than our old school in St. Louis." Eleanor smiled, encouraged by this rare voluntary observation. "Yes, it is, and soon it will be full of children eager to learn." "Will they be mean like that boy yesterday?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. Eleanor knelt down, meeting her daughter's worried gaze. "Some might be at first. New places and new people can be scary, and sometimes people say unkind things when they're scared or don't understand something. But I'll be there, and I suspect you'll make friends quickly." Sarah didn't look convinced, but she nodded bravely. As they entered into the schoolhouse, Eleanor was struck by both the possibilities and the challenges. The room was cold, the stove unlit for weeks. Dust covered every surface. The books on the shelves were few and worn, many missing pages. The desks were of various sizes, some with initials and crude drawings carved into their surfaces by generations of students. Yet there was something hopeful about the space, the way light streamed through the windows, the sturdy construction that had weathered decades of Montana winters, the sense of purpose embedded in its very existence. This building represented opportunity not just for the children of Redemption Creek, but for Eleanor and Sarah as well. A new chapter. A chance to rebuild their lives after William's devastating betrayal. Eleanor was so lost in thought that she didn't immediately notice the figure standing in the doorway. When she looked up, she found Nathaniel Hayes watching them, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Hayes?" she acknowledged, surprised. "What brings you to the schoolhouse?" He stepped inside, removing his hat. "I was in town on business and saw you enter. Thought I might offer assistance in preparing for the term." Eleanor glanced around at the dusty, cold room. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose. As I said yesterday, it's not an imposition." His gaze traveled around the space, assessing. "The stove needs cleaning before it can be lit safely. The chimney may be blocked, and you'll freeze in here without proper firewood." Before Eleanor could respond, Sarah approached Nathaniel cautiously, looking up at his tall figure with curiosity rather than fear. "Are you a giant?" she asked suddenly. Eleanor gasped. "Sarah, that's not polite." But Nathaniel's expression softened in that barely perceptible way she'd noticed at church. "Not a giant, Miss Sarah. Just taller than most men, I suppose." Sarah considered this. "My papa was tall, too, but not as tall as you." The casual mention of William, something Sarah rarely did anymore, surprised Eleanor. Even more surprising was Nathaniel's response. Was he, "Well, height isn't everything. I'm sure your father had many fine qualities." Sarah nodded solemnly. "He told good stories, and he could whistle songs." "Excellent talents," Nathaniel agreed gravely. "I'm afraid I can't whistle at all." Sarah's eyes widened. "Not even a little? Not even a note?" A small smile touched Sarah's lips, the first real smile Eleanor had seen since William's death. Something loosened in her chest at the sight. Nathaniel turned back to Eleanor. "With your permission, I'll send a few men from the ranch to help prepare the schoolhouse. Jacob is particularly skilled with stoves and chimneys, and I can arrange for a cord of firewood to be delivered." Eleanor wanted to refuse pride and the desire for independence, warring with practical necessity. But the cold room and Sarah's health made the decision for her. "Thank you," she said simply. "That would be most helpful." Nathaniel nodded once. "They'll come tomorrow morning." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "And this is for Miss Sarah. A welcome gift." Sarah accepted the package with wide eyes. With Eleanor's encouraging nod, she carefully unwrapped it to reveal a small wooden whistle carved in the shape of a bird. "Since you mentioned your father could whistle," Nathaniel explained, "perhaps this might serve until you learn the skill yourself." Sarah examined the whistle with reverence, then looked up at Nathaniel with newfound admiration. "Thank you," she whispered, the words clearly audible, another small miracle. "You're very welcome." He turned to Eleanor, his expression once again composed. "I should take my leave. Good day, Mrs. Morgan, Miss Sarah." As he departed, Sarah raised the whistle to her lips and blew gently. A sweet warbling note filled the dusty schoolroom, a sound so unexpected and joyful in that cold space that Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. Sarah looked up at her mother, wonder replacing the habitual sadness in her young face. "It sounds like a bird, Mama." "Yes, darling," Eleanor agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful sound for our new beginning." Outside the schoolhouse window, Eleanor caught a glimpse of Nathaniel Hayes mounting his horse. Just before he rode away, he glanced back at the building, his gaze meeting hers briefly through the glass. Something passed between them, in that moment an unspoken understanding, a shared recognition of pain and possibility. Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor to wonder once again about the man who seemed determined to help them despite his obvious preference for solitude. The doctor who no longer practiced medicine. The neighbor who spoke of responsibility, yet acted with what seemed like genuine compassion. As Sarah continued to experiment with her new whistle filling the empty schoolhouse with music, Eleanor realized that Redemption Creek might offer more than just a fresh start. It might offer something she'd stopped believing in after William's death, the possibility of true connection, of finding people who could be trusted with her fragile heart. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The following days passed in a blur of preparation. True to his word, Nathaniel sent 3 men from Evergreen Ranch to help ready the schoolhouse. By week's end, the stove was cleaned and functioning, the chimney cleared, windows washed, and floors scrubbed. A generous cord of split firewood stood neatly stacked against the schoolhouse's exterior wall. Eleanor met with the school board, comprising Mayor Blackwood, Reverend Parker, and to her surprise, Nathaniel Hayes himself, listed as treasurer. The meeting went well, with the board officially confirming her position and approving a modest budget for new primers and slate boards. Throughout it all, Eleanor worked tirelessly, determined to prove herself worthy of the opportunity. She organized the existing books, created lessons for varying skill levels, and prepared the small cabin behind the schoolhouse for their eventual occupation. Sarah, meanwhile, showed small but significant improvements. Though still quiet around strangers, she no longer hid behind Eleanor at every introduction. The wooden whistle rarely left her possession, and Eleanor often caught her practicing with it, seemingly intent on mastering different notes and rhythms. It was during their second week in Redemption Creek, as Eleanor was preparing the classroom for the term's start, that she noticed Sarah's cough. At first it seemed minor, a slight clearing of the throat, nothing concerning. But by evening the cough had deepened and Sarah's forehead felt warm to the touch. "Just a chill," Rebecca reassured when Eleanor expressed concern. "Children catch them easily in winter. A good night's rest should set her right." But morning brought no improvement. Sarah's cough had worsened, and now several other children in town were reported ill with similar symptoms. By midday, Rebecca returned from a neighbor's house with troubling news. 3 children from the Miller family are sick with fever and cough, she reported, and the Simpsons' youngest collapsed during morning chores. Dr. Finch is overwhelmed. Eleanor's concern deepened. Dr. Finch. "The town doctor," Rebecca explained. Elderly, semi-retired. Does his best, but she hesitated. In truth, he's more skilled with broken bones than fevers. Eleanor sat beside Sarah's bed, pressing a cool cloth to the child's forehead. Sarah's breathing was labored, her small face flushed with fever. Fear clutched at Eleanor's heart, a fear all too familiar since William's death. The thought of losing Sarah. "There must be something more we can do," she said desperately. Rebecca hesitated, then spoke carefully. "There is someone with greater medical skill than Dr. Finch, though he no longer practices officially." Nathaniel Hayes, Eleanor realized. The doctor who had abandoned his calling. Rebecca nodded. "He helps quietly when cases are desperate. Usually sends remedies through Martha, rather than treating patients directly." Eleanor made her decision instantly. "I'm going to Evergreen Ranch. Sarah needs proper medical attention." "Eleanor, wait," Rebecca cautioned. "Nathaniel is particular about his privacy. He might not welcome—" "I don't care," Eleanor interrupted, rising from Sarah's bedside. "My daughter is ill, and if he has the skills to help her, I'll face his displeasure gladly." Rebecca studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll stay with Sarah. Take my horse. She's gentle and knows the way to Evergreen." Within 30 minutes, Eleanor was riding through the cold afternoon, her heart pounding with fear and determination. The journey to Evergreen Ranch seemed interminable, though in reality it took less than an hour. Each minute weighed on her conscience, each of Sarah's labored breaths replaying in her mind. When she finally arrived, Eleanor didn't bother with propriety. She dismounted quickly and hurried to the front door, knocking with urgent insistence. Martha opened the door, surprise evident on her kind face. "Mrs. Morgan, is everything—" "I need to speak with Mr. Hayes immediately," Eleanor interrupted. "It's Sarah, she's ill, and I believe it may be serious." Before Martha could respond, Nathaniel appeared in the hallway behind her. He must have heard Eleanor's voice. "What's happened?" he asked, his tone sharp with concern. "Sarah has a high fever and cough that's worsening by the hour," Eleanor explained quickly. "And she's not the only one. Several children in town have fallen ill. Rebecca says the town doctor is overwhelmed." Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, a hardening, a withdrawal. "I'm a rancher, Mrs. Morgan, not a physician. Dr. Finch." "Please," Eleanor interrupted, desperation overriding courtesy. "Rebecca told me about your medical background. Sarah is struggling to breathe properly. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't afraid for her life." Nathaniel stood perfectly still, his face betraying nothing of his thoughts. For a moment, Eleanor feared he would refuse. Then, with a barely perceptible sigh, he turned to Martha. "Prepare my medical bag," he instructed, "and tell Jacob to ready the wagon with the enclosed bed. It will be warmer for the return journey." He looked back at Eleanor. "We'll leave immediately." Relief washed over her like a wave. "Thank you," she whispered. Nathaniel's expression remained guarded. "Don't thank me yet. I haven't examined her." Within minutes, they were on their way back to town, Nathaniel driving the wagon with Eleanor beside him. They traveled in tense silence, the only sound the rhythmic hoofbeats of the horses and the creak of wagon wheels on the packed snow. "How many children have shown symptoms?" Nathaniel finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. "At least 6 that I know of. All with fever and cough." "Age range?" 4 to 12, I believe. Sarah is the youngest." Nathaniel nodded thoughtfully. "And the water source for the town?" The question surprised Eleanor. "The town, well, I assume. Why, curious," he said, offering no further explanation. His gaze remained fixed on the road ahead, his profile a study in contained tension. When they reached the boarding house, Nathaniel transformed. The remote, reluctant rancher disappeared, replaced by a confident, focused physician. He moved with purpose, examining Sarah with gentle efficiency, his large hands surprisingly delicate, as he listened to her chest and felt her glands. Bronchitis, he diagnosed after a thorough examination, possibly progressing toward pneumonia, if not treated. He opened his medical bag, extracting various bottles and instruments. She'll need a mustard plaster for her chest, herbal steam inhalations, and this tonic every 4 hours. As he mixed medicines and instructed Eleanor and Rebecca on treatment, Sarah watched him with feverish eyes. Despite her illness, she seemed unafraid of his ministrations, complying with his requests to breathe deeply or swallow medicine without protest. "You're being very brave, Miss Sarah," Nathaniel told her as he prepared to leave. "Much braver than most of my adult patients." A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's pale lips. "Will I get better?" she whispered, her voice raspy. Nathaniel's expression softened in that subtle way Eleanor was beginning to recognize. "Yes, you will. Your mother is going to take excellent care of you, and I'll return tomorrow to check on your progress." As they stepped outside Sarah's room, Eleanor grabbed Nathaniel's arm impulsively. "Thank you," she said, emotion making her voice unsteady. "I don't know what I would have done if—" "Don't," Nathaniel interrupted, his voice low. "Don't thank me for doing what any decent person would do. But not everyone could have helped her. You have a gift." Something dark flashed in his eyes. "A gift that failed those who mattered most to me." He withdrew his arm from her grasp. "Follow the treatment regimen precisely. I'll return in the morning." Before Eleanor could respond, he descended the stairs, nodding briefly to Rebecca before departing. Through the window, Eleanor watched him mount his horse and ride away. His back straight, his shoulders rigid, with what she now recognized as carefully controlled grief. "He's carrying so much pain," she murmured, more to herself than Rebecca. "Yes," Rebecca agreed quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Loss changes people. You, of all people, should understand that." Eleanor turned to her in surprise. Rebecca's expression was gentle but knowing. "We all have our burdens to bear," the older woman continued. "Our secrets, our regrets. What matters is whether we let them destroy us or find a way to carry on despite them." The words struck Eleanor with unexpected force. Rebecca was right. She did understand Nathaniel's pain perhaps better than most. The loss of a spouse, the crushing weight of guilt and regret, the struggle to rebuild a life from the ashes of tragedy. Though their circumstances differed, the emotional landscape was eerily familiar. As she returned to Sarah's bedside, administering the medicine as directed, Eleanor found herself wondering what might happen if Nathaniel knew the truth about William's death. Would he judge her for the deception, or would he recognize in her story the same impossible choices and painful compromises he himself had faced? The thought was both terrifying and oddly comforting, the possibility that someone might truly understand the complexity of her grief, the burden of her secrets. But such understanding would require honesty. She wasn't ready to offer trust. She wasn't prepared to extend. For now, Sarah's recovery was all that mattered. The rest, the mysteries of Nathaniel Hayes, the secrets of her own past, the uncertain future awaiting them in Redemption Creek, would have to wait. True to his word, Nathaniel returned the next morning to check on Sarah. Eleanor met him at the door, relief evident in her tired face. She had spent the night at her daughter's bedside, administering medicine, applying mustard plasters, and monitoring her breathing. "She's better," Eleanor said immediately. "Her fever broke around dawn, and her breathing is much easier." Nathaniel nodded, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts as he removed his coat. I'd like to examine her, if I may. Eleanor led him upstairs, where Sarah lay propped against pillows, her color much improved from the previous day. When she saw Nathaniel, a small smile touched her lips. "Good morning, Miss Sarah," he greeted her, his deep voice gentler than usual. "I hear you're feeling better today." Sarah nodded. "Mama made me breathe over hot water with leaves in it," she reported. "It smelled funny." "Eucalyptus," Nathaniel explained, setting his medical bag on the bedside table. "Excellent for clearing congested lungs." He placed his stethoscope against her chest. "Take a deep breath for me." Sarah complied, watching him with curious eyes as he continued his examination. When he was finished, Nathaniel sat back, satisfaction evident in his posture, if not his expression. "You're recovering well," he told her, "but you'll need to rest for a few more days. No going outside until that cough is completely gone." Sarah's face fell. "But what about my whistle practice? I was learning a new song." Nathaniel's mouth twitched, almost forming a smile. "I believe whistle practice can continue provided you don't overexert yourself." This concession brightened Sarah's mood considerably. Eleanor watched the exchange with a mixture of gratitude and fascination. Something about Nathaniel's calm, steady presence seemed to draw Sarah out of the shell she'd inhabited since William's death. As they descended the stairs, Eleanor asked, "What about the other children? Have you seen them?" Nathaniel hesitated. "Yes, 6 cases similar to Sarah's, 2 progressing to pneumonia, though they should recover with proper care." His tone became more formal, professional. "I've left medicines with their families and instructions for treatment." "Thank you for helping them," Eleanor said sincerely. "I know you prefer not to practice medicine anymore." Something flickered in Nathaniel's green eyes, a shadow of old pain. "I made an exception. The children's situation was concerning." Eleanor waited for him to elaborate, but Nathaniel seemed lost in thought. Finally he spoke again, his voice low. "There's something troubling about these illnesses. The pattern of infection, the concentration around the school and nearby homes." He shook his head. "I need to investigate further before drawing conclusions." "Is there anything I can do to help?" Eleanor asked. Nathaniel regarded her thoughtfully. "Perhaps you'll be at the school preparing for the term's start." "Yes, every day this week." "The school's water comes from a well behind the building, correct?" Eleanor nodded, puzzled by the question. "Yes, there's a hand pump in the yard." "Don't drink from it," Nathaniel instructed firmly, "nor allow Sarah to do so. Bring water from Rebecca's well until I've had a chance to test it." Alarm flashed through Eleanor. "You think the water is causing the illnesses?" "It's a possibility I need to eliminate." His tone was measured, careful. "No need to raise concerns publicly yet. Just exercise caution." Eleanor studied his face, noting the tension around his eyes, the slight furrow between his brows. "You've seen something like this before, haven't you?" Nathaniel met her gaze directly, and for a moment the carefully maintained distance between them seemed to diminish. "During the war," he admitted quietly, "contaminated water sources caused more deaths than bullets in some campaigns. The symptoms are familiar." The admission, this small glimpse into his past, felt significant. Eleanor wanted to ask more to understand the experiences that had shaped this complex man, but Nathaniel was already reaching for his coat, his mask of professional detachment firmly back in place. "Continue Sarah's treatments for 3 more days," he instructed. "If her cough worsens or the fever returns, send word immediately." "I will," Eleanor promised. "And Mr. Hayes, Nathaniel, thank you again." He paused at the door, his back to her. "As I said before, don't thank me for basic human decency." "Is that what this is?" Eleanor challenged gently. Because, from where I stand, it looks like something more. Nathaniel turned slightly, his profile outlined against the morning light streaming through the window. For a moment, he seemed about to speak, to offer some explanation or insight into his actions. Instead, he simply nodded once and departed, leaving Eleanor with more questions than answers about the enigmatic man who had twice now come to their aid in times of need. By the end of the week, Sarah had recovered enough to accompany Eleanor to the schoolhouse. While Eleanor organized books and prepared lesson plans, Sarah explored the building, her footsteps echoing in the empty classroom. "Mama, look," she called, standing on tiptoe to peer out a window at the back of the room. "There are children at the water pump." Eleanor joined her daughter at the window. Outside, 3 boys were taking turns pumping water and splashing each other, their laughter carrying through the glass. "Sarah, stay inside," Eleanor instructed firmly, remembering Nathaniel's warning. "I need to speak with those boys." She hurried outside, approaching the children with what she hoped was a friendly but authoritative manner. "Hello there. Are you planning to attend school next week?" The tallest boy, perhaps 11 or 12, wiped water from his face and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Daniel Miller. These are my brothers, James and Thomas." "I'm Mrs. Morgan, your new teacher," Eleanor introduced herself. "I'm afraid I need to ask you boys not to use this pump for now. The water might not be safe." The boys exchanged confused glances. "But we always drink from it," James protested. "Everyone does." "I understand, but there's been some illness going around and we're checking all the water sources to be safe." Eleanor tried to sound reassuring rather than alarming. "Have any of you been feeling unwell? Coughing fever?" Daniel shrugged. "Thomas was sick last week. Had to stay in bed for days. Ma said it was just winter croup." Eleanor's concern deepened. Another child affected by the mysterious illness. "Is he feeling better now?" Thomas, the youngest, at perhaps 7 years old, nodded vigorously. "Dr. Hayes gave me medicine that tasted like tree bark. It was awful, but made my chest stop hurting." Eleanor's eyebrows rose at the title the boy had used. "Dr. Hayes. That's what Pa calls him," Daniel explained. "Says he was a real army doctor during the war, saved hundreds of soldiers." His eyes widened with boyish admiration. "Pa says he could take a bullet out of a man in less than a minute during battles." "Is that so?" Eleanor murmured, filing away this new information about Nathaniel's past. "Well, Dr. Hayes is concerned about this water, so we should respect his judgment, don't you think?" The boys nodded reluctantly. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now I expect to see all of you bright and early Monday morning for the first day of school." As the Miller boys headed off, Eleanor examined the pump more closely. It appeared ordinary enough, a simple iron hand pump mounted on a stone base. The well beneath had presumably served the school for many years without issue. What had changed? Returning inside, she found Sarah sitting at one of the student desks, drawing with a piece of chalk on her small slate. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Eleanor asked, glancing over her shoulder. Sarah tilted the slate to show a simple but recognizable rendering of a house with 3 figures standing beside it: a tall man, a woman, and a small child. "That's Mr. Hayes's ranch," Sarah explained matter-of-factly. "And that's him and you and me." Eleanor stared at the drawing, a strange tightness forming in her chest. "Sarah, why did you draw us at Mr. Hayes's ranch?" Sarah concentrated on adding details to the tall figure. "Because he said I could visit the kittens when I'm better. And because he makes you smile." "He makes me smile," Eleanor repeated, caught off guard by her daughter's observation. "Not a big smile," Sarah clarified seriously. "A small one here." She pointed to the corner of her own mouth, like when Papa used to bring you flowers." The comparison to William sent a jolt through Eleanor. She hadn't realized Sarah was so observant of her reactions to Nathaniel, nor that her daughter would connect those reactions to memories of her father. "Mr. Hayes is just being kind to us because we're new in town," Eleanor explained carefully. "The way many people have been." Sarah seemed unconvinced. "Mrs. Rebecca says he doesn't talk to hardly anybody, but he talks to us. And he gave me my whistle." She returned to her drawing, adding what appeared to be a horse beside the figures. "I like him. He's not smiley, but he's nice." Out of the mouths of babes, Eleanor thought. Sarah's simple assessment echoed her own confused feelings about Nathaniel Hayes, a man whose reserved exterior concealed what seemed to be a deeply compassionate nature. Before she could dwell further on these thoughts, the schoolhouse door opened. Eleanor turned, half expecting to see Nathaniel himself, as if her thoughts had somehow summoned him. Instead, Judith Blackwood stood in the doorway, her thin figure rigid with disapproval as she surveyed the classroom. "Mrs. Morgan," she acknowledged coldly, "I see you've been busy preparing." "Mrs. Blackwood," Eleanor greeted her with forced politeness. "Yes, we're nearly ready for Monday's start. Did you need something?" Judith stepped further into the room, removing her gloves with deliberate slowness. "The school board specifically, my husband asked me to ensure everything was in order." Her gaze swept critically over the bookshelves, the clean chalkboard, the neat rows of desks. "I must say, I'm surprised at how much you've accomplished, given your situation." The implication was clear: a widow with a young child should be struggling, not succeeding. Eleanor maintained her composure, years of dealing with St. Louis society having taught her to weather such subtle insults with dignity. "Everyone has been very helpful," she replied evenly. "The community seems invested in the school's success." "Yes, some more than others," Judith remarked, her sharp eyes landing on Sarah, who had abandoned her slate to watch the visitor warily. "I understand Nathaniel Hayes has taken quite an interest in your welfare." Eleanor felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Hayes has been kind enough to assist with some repairs to the building, as have many townspeople." Judith's thin lips curved in what might generously be called a smile. "How fortunate for you to receive such personal attention from our town's most eligible bachelor." The insinuation hung in the air between them. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, meeting Judith's gaze directly. "I assure you, Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Hayes's assistance has been entirely proper and motivated solely by community spirit. Now, if you'll excuse us, Sarah and I have much to do before Monday." For a moment, Judith seemed prepared to continue her veiled interrogation. Then, with a slight sniff, she replaced her gloves. "Of course, I wouldn't want to interfere with your preparations." She paused at the door. "One small matter my husband mentioned: you might be requiring additional resources for the school. Any requests should be directed through proper channels, the school board, rather than seeking private donations." The reference to Nathaniel's assistance was unmistakable. Eleanor nodded politely. "I'll bear that in mind. Thank you." After Judith departed, Eleanor released a long, slow breath, tension draining from her shoulders. Sarah appeared beside her, slipping a small hand into hers. "I don't think that lady likes us very much," she observed quietly. Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand. "Some people take time to warm up to newcomers. We just need to be patient and show her what good neighbors we can be." Even as she spoke the reassuring words, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that Judith Blackwood's disapproval stemmed from something deeper than mere suspicion of newcomers. The woman's pointed references to Nathaniel suggested jealousy or possessiveness, perhaps on behalf of some relative or friend she had hoped would catch his interest. Whatever the reason, Eleanor resolved to be more careful about accepting Nathaniel's assistance publicly. The last thing she needed was to become the center of town gossip before she'd even taught her first lesson. The first day of school arrived with perfect January weather, clear skies, crisp air, and sunshine that made the snow-covered landscape glitter like diamonds. Eleanor stood nervously at the teacher's desk, watching as 15 children of various ages filed into the schoolhouse, eyeing her with curiosity. Sarah sat at a front desk, wearing her best dress and a ribbon Eleanor had splurged on at the mercantile. She was the youngest student, but Eleanor had decided she was ready for basic lessons, particularly since keeping her at home alone wasn't an option. "Good morning, children," Eleanor began when everyone was seated. "I'm Mrs. Morgan, your new teacher. I look forward to getting to know each of you as we learn together this term." The older students nodded politely, while the younger ones squirmed in their seats. Oliver Blackwood, sitting in the middle row, regarded Eleanor with the same pinched expression his mother often wore. Beside him, Daniel Miller and another boy whispered something that made Oliver snicker behind his hand. "Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Miller," Eleanor called firmly. "In this classroom, we give our full attention when someone is speaking. Is that understood?" The boys straightened, surprised at being addressed so directly. "Yes, ma'am," they mumbled in unison. "Excellent. Now, let's begin by introducing ourselves. Please stand when I call your name and tell us something about yourself." As the introductions proceeded, Eleanor began to get a sense of her students. From 15-year-old Clara Thompson, who clearly wanted to be anywhere but school, to 7-year-old Thomas Miller, who proudly announced he could recite the multiplication tables up to 6. Each child revealed something of their personality and circumstances. When it was Sarah's turn, she stood beside her desk, suddenly shy with all eyes upon her. "I'm Sarah Morgan. I'm 5.5. I like kittens," Oliver Blackwood smirked. "And she ain't got no pa," he whispered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Eleanor felt a surge of protective anger. But before she could speak, Clara Thompson turned in her seat to glare at Oliver. "Hush your mouth, Oliver Blackwood. Not everyone's lucky enough to have both parents living." Oliver's face reddened, but he fell silent under the older girl's rebuke. "Thank you, Sarah," Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice steady. "And thank you, Clara, for reminding us all about kindness and respect. Those will be fundamental principles in our classroom." The rest of the day passed in a blur of assessments and organization, as Eleanor determined each student's academic level and established classroom routines. By the time she dismissed the children at 300, she was exhausted, but cautiously optimistic about the term ahead. As Eleanor erased the chalkboard while Sarah practiced her letters at a desk, the schoolhouse door opened, admitting Rebecca with a covered basket. "Thought you might be too tired to cook tonight," Rebecca explained, setting the basket on Eleanor's desk. "Just some chicken and dumplings. Nothing fancy." "Rebecca, you're an angel," Eleanor sighed gratefully. "It's been quite a day." "So I heard. Clara Thompson told me all about it on her way home." Rebecca's eyes twinkled, including how she stood up to Oliver Blackwood when he tried to tease Sarah. Eleanor frowned. "I wish I could say it was me, but Clara came to Sarah's defense before I could intervene. I'm afraid the Blackwood family doesn't think much of us." "Judith Blackwood doesn't think much of anyone who hasn't been in Redemption Creek for at least 3 generations, Rebecca scoffed. "And she's been particularly sour since you arrived." She lowered her voice, though only Sarah was present, absorbed in her writing practice. Word is she had hopes of matching Nathaniel with her niece from Helena. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "That's absurd. Mr. Hayes and I barely know each other." "Well, you were busy with your students, but Clara noticed," said he circled back a second time after an hour like he was checking on something. Rebecca patted Eleanor's hand. It's nothing to be embarrassed about, dear. Nathaniel Hayes is a good man, hard-working, honest, and by all accounts, a gentleman. And it's been 18 months since William passed. I'm not looking for a husband, Eleanor protested, lowering her voice to ensure Sarah wouldn't overhear. I came here to make a new start for Sarah and myself to be independent. Independence is all well and good. Rebecca's expression grew serious. But a woman alone faces challenges, a man doesn't. I'm not saying you should marry the first man who shows interest. I'm saying you shouldn't close your heart to possibilities because you're afraid of being hurt again. Eleanor sighed, glancing at Sarah, who was now drawing on her slate. It's not just about me, Rebecca. Sarah's already lost one father. I can't risk her becoming attached to someone who might not stay. Fair enough, Rebecca conceded. But from what I hear, Nathaniel Hayes isn't the type to make promises lightly. When he told Sarah she wasn't alone that day at church, I suspect he meant it in some fashion, whether as a friend, a protector, or perhaps something more in time. Before Eleanor could respond, the schoolhouse door opened again. This time it was Nathaniel himself, hat in hand, looking slightly hesitant to find Eleanor not alone. Mrs. Foster, he greeted Rebecca. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Rebecca replied with a smile that was almost mischievous. I was just dropping off some supper for our hard-working teacher, but I should be getting back. Clara will be wondering where I've gone off to. She gathered her shawl around her shoulders. Eleanor, enjoy the chicken while it's hot. Good evening, Mr. Hayes. As Rebecca bustled out, Sarah spotted Nathaniel and ran to him excitedly. Mr. Hayes, I went to school today and I wrote my letters, and I read a whole page by myself. Nathaniel's expression softened as he crouched down to her level. Did you now? That's impressive, Miss Sarah. Soon you'll be reading whole books. I already can read some of the ones you gave me, Sarah declared proudly. Mama helps with the big words. I've no doubt you're the smartest student in the school. He glanced up at Eleanor, his green eyes warm. Though I suspect you have an excellent teacher. Eleanor smiled despite her lingering embarrassment from Rebecca's teasing. What brings you to town, Nathaniel? Surely not to check on our first day of school. Actually, that's exactly why I'm here. He stood, his tall frame seeming to fill the modest schoolhouse. Thought I'd see how you both fared. He hesitated, then added, but I also wanted to discuss the water situation. Have you discovered something? Eleanor asked, concern immediately replacing her awareness of his presence. Nathaniel nodded, his expression turning serious. I've tested samples from various wells around town. The school's well shows contamination mineral runoff, possibly from the new mining operation north of town. Eleanor gasped. Mayor Blackwood's mine. Is that why the children have been falling ill? I believe so. The symptoms match those of certain mineral poisonings, low levels, but enough to affect children more severely than adults. His jaw tightened. I've tried to speak with Blackwood about it, but he dismisses my concerns as unscientific speculation. What can we do? For now, I've had clean water delivered from Evergreen Ranch. It's in barrels behind the schoolhouse, enough for drinking and washing for several weeks. Nathaniel paced the length of the classroom, his frustration evident. But it's not a permanent solution. The mine needs proper containment measures to prevent further contamination. Eleanor considered the implications. If what you're saying is true, Mayor Blackwood is responsible for making children ill. Yet, he refuses to address the problem. He claims the timing is coincidental. Children always get sick in winter. Nathaniel stopped pacing, turning to face her directly. But I've seen this pattern before. During the war, a mining company near our field hospital contaminated a creek. 50 men fell ill before we traced the source. It was the second time he'd voluntarily mentioned his war experience. Eleanor sensed an opening, a chance to understand more about this complex man. "You served as a surgeon during the Civil War?" she asked gently. Nathaniel's gaze grew distant. "Yes, 4 years with the Union Army, mostly in Virginia and Pennsylvania campaigns. That must have been difficult." "War always is," he replied simply. Then, seemingly uncomfortable with the personal turn of the conversation, he redirected. "I've spoken with Dr. Finch about the water concerns. He's agreed to monitor any new cases and document symptoms." Eleanor nodded, accepting his retreat. "And what about the school? Should we continue as normal?" "Yes, but use only the water I've provided. And watch for any symptoms among your students: headaches, stomach upset, persistent cough." Sarah, who had been quietly listening to their conversation, suddenly tugged at Nathaniel's coat. "Mr. Hayes, when can I see the kittens at your ranch? You promised when I was better." The abrupt change of subject seemed to catch Nathaniel off guard. He looked down at Sarah's hopeful face, his stern expression softening almost imperceptibly. "The kittens are growing quite quickly, Miss Sarah. Perhaps this Sunday after church, if your mother agrees." He glanced at Eleanor questioningly. Put on the spot. Eleanor hesitated. A visit to Evergreen Ranch would surely fuel the gossip Rebecca had mentioned. Yet she couldn't bear to disappoint Sarah, who looked more animated than she had in months. "That's very kind," she said finally. "If you're certain we wouldn't be imposing." "Not at all," Nathaniel assured her, something like relief flickering in his eyes. "Martha would be delighted to have company for Sunday dinner. She often complains the house is too quiet." "Then we accept. Thank you." As Nathaniel prepared to leave, Sarah surprised them both by throwing her arms around his legs in a spontaneous hug. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I'll wear my best dress to meet the kittens." Eleanor saw surprise, then genuine pleasure cross Nathaniel's face as he awkwardly patted Sarah's shoulder. It was perhaps the most unguarded moment she'd witnessed from him, a brief glimpse of the man beneath the carefully maintained reserve. "Good evening, Mrs. Morgan," he said softly, as Sarah released him. "Miss Sarah, I'll see you both on Sunday." After he departed, Eleanor found herself standing at the window watching his tall figure mount his horse and ride away. Sarah appeared beside her, her small face thoughtful. "Mama," she said suddenly, "do you think Mr. Hayes is lonely?" The question caught Eleanor by surprise. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" Sarah considered seriously. "His house is so big, but it's just him and Mrs. Martha. And he doesn't smile much, but his eyes get sad sometimes, like yours do when you think I'm not looking." Eleanor knelt to her daughter's level, struck by the perceptiveness of her observation. "I think perhaps Mr. Hayes has been sad for a long time, like we have since Papa died. Being lonely is part of being sad sometimes." Sarah nodded solemnly. "Then we should be his friends, so he won't be lonely anymore." The simple wisdom of a child, Eleanor thought. If only adult relationships were so straightforward, extend friendship to those who need it without complications or reservations. Yet her own feelings toward Nathaniel Hayes were becoming increasingly complex, a mixture of gratitude, admiration, curiosity, and something more, something she wasn't quite ready to name. "We'll certainly be his friends," she assured Sarah, rising to her feet. "Now, let's head home. Rebecca's chicken and dumplings are waiting, and we have a busy week ahead." As they gathered their belongings, Eleanor couldn't help but dwell on what Nathaniel had revealed about the water contamination. If he was right, and she suspected he was Redemption Creek, faced a serious problem, and confronting Mayor Blackwood about his mine would surely make her position in town even more precarious. Yet she couldn't ignore a threat to her students' health. Somehow, she would need to find a way to address the contamination without alienating the very people whose support she needed to maintain her teaching position, as if she needed another challenge in her new life. Sunday dawned clear and crisp, perfect weather for their visit to Evergreen Ranch. Eleanor dressed Sarah in her best dress, the blue calico, with only one small patch at the elbow, and tied her dark curls back with a matching ribbon. For herself, Eleanor chose her navy Sunday dress and arranged her honey blonde hair more carefully than usual. "Remember your manners today?" she reminded Sarah as they rode in Rebecca's buggy toward Evergreen Ranch. "Mr. Hayes is being very kind to invite us." "I will," Sarah promised, practically bouncing with excitement. "Do you think the kittens will like me?" "I'm sure they will." Eleanor smiled, touched by her daughter's enthusiasm. After months of seeing Sarah withdrawn and solemn, this spark of childish eagerness felt like a miracle. As they approached the ranch, Eleanor was once again struck by its impressive scale. The main house, a large two-story structure of timber and stone, stood at the center of the property, surrounded by various outbuildings, corrals, and a massive barn. Well-tended fences bordered the road leading to the house, and smoke curled invitingly from the stone chimney. Nathaniel himself came out to meet them as the buggy approached, helping first Eleanor and then Sarah down with gentle courtesy. "Welcome to Evergreen," he said, his usual reserve tempered with what appeared to be genuine pleasure at their visit. "I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." "Not at all," Eleanor assured him. "The road was clear, and the weather is perfect." "Excellent." He turned to Sarah, who was gazing wide-eyed at the ranch buildings. "Miss Sarah, I believe Martha has prepared some refreshments before we visit the barn. Would you like to come inside?" Sarah nodded eagerly, slipping her small hand into Nathaniel's much larger one, with a natural trust that caught Eleanor by surprise. The gesture seemed to affect Nathaniel as well. He glanced down at their joined hands with momentary wonder before carefully leading Sarah toward the house. Inside, Eleanor was once again struck by the contrast between the ranch's imposing exterior and the warmth of its interior. Polished wood floors gleamed in the sunlight streaming through large windows. Comfortable furniture, well worn, but of quality craftsmanship, invited relaxation. Bookshelves lined one wall of the main sitting room, filled with volumes that ranged from practical agriculture manuals to leather-bound classics. Martha greeted them warmly, exclaiming over Sarah's growth since their brief stay during the blizzard. "Come, child, I've made cinnamon rolls special for your visit, and hot chocolate to warm you after your cold ride." While Sarah happily accompanied Martha to the kitchen, Eleanor found herself alone with Nathaniel in the sitting room. He seemed momentarily uncertain, as if entertaining visitors was a skill long forgotten. "You have a beautiful home," she offered, breaking the silence. "Thank you," he replied, gesturing for her to take a seat. "It was just a bachelor's quarters until Martha came along 7 years ago and civilized the place." Eleanor settled onto a comfortable armchair, noting the way Nathaniel remained standing, his large frame somehow constrained despite the spacious room. 7 years, that would be after Caroline and James died, he confirmed quietly. "Yes, I couldn't bear to stay in Helena, surrounded by memories and well-meaning sympathy. I needed space, distance." "I understand," Eleanor said softly. "After William died, St. Louis became unbearable. Every street, every shop held memories I couldn't escape." Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, a recognition, perhaps, of their shared experience of grief. He sat down across from her, his posture relaxing slightly. "Rebecca mentioned you taught in St. Louis before your daughter was born." "Yes, at a small private academy for girls. I enjoyed it immensely." And now you find yourself teaching in a one-room schoolhouse in Montana Territory, Nathaniel observed. Quite a change. Eleanor smiled ruefully. Life rarely follows the path we expect, does it? When I married William, I imagined a very different future. A comfortable home in St. Louis, perhaps more children, a life of relative ease. She glanced toward the kitchen where Sarah's laughter could be heard. Instead, here I am, starting over in a frontier town. Do you regret it? Nathaniel asked, his green eyes studying her intently. Coming to Redemption Creek. Eleanor considered the question seriously. No, she said finally. Despite the challenges, I believe we're where we need to be. Sarah is happier here, more herself than she's been since William's death. And I find I enjoy the teaching different as it is from my previous experience. Nathaniel nodded thoughtfully. The West changes people, strips away pretensions, forces honesty about what truly matters. And his gaze remained steady on her face. You strike me as someone who adapts well to change, Eleanor. The use of her first name, rare from his lips, sent an unexpected warmth through her. I've had to learn adaptability, she replied, though I suspect you understand that necessity better than most. Before Nathaniel could respond, Sarah burst into the room, her face alight with excitement. Mama! Mrs. Martha says we can see the kittens now, and then the horses. Nathaniel rose from his chair, the serious moment broken by Sarah's enthusiasm. Indeed, we can, Miss Sarah. They're in the barn, and I believe they've been looking forward to your visit. The barn was warm and sweet-smelling, filled with the soft sounds of animals and the filtered sunlight that streamed through high windows. In a corner near the tack room, a black cat with white paws lay nursing 5 kittens in a bed of clean straw. Sarah approached reverently, kneeling at a respectful distance. What's the mama cat's name? She whispered. Shadow, Nathaniel replied, crouching beside her. Because she's all black except for those white paws. She's beautiful, Sarah breathed, watching as one of the kittens, a tiny gray ball of fluff, detached from its mother and wobbled toward them on unsteady legs. I believe this one wants to meet you, Nathaniel said gently, scooping up the kitten and placing it in Sarah's cupped hands. Be very gentle, he's still quite young. Eleanor watched as her daughter cradled the kitten with infinite care, her small face transformed by wonder. Sarah had always loved animals, but opportunities to interact with them had been limited in their city life. The joy that radiated from her now made Eleanor's heart ache, with both happiness and a strange wistfulness for all the normal childhood experiences Sarah had missed. He's purring, Sarah exclaimed softly as the kitten vibrated in her palms. Mama, do you hear it? I do. Eleanor smiled, kneeling beside her daughter. He must like you very much. What's his name? Sarah asked, looking up at Nathaniel. He doesn't have one yet, Nathaniel replied. Perhaps you might suggest something suitable. Sarah considered this responsibility seriously, studying the tiny creature. Smoke, she decided finally, because he's gray, like the smoke from our chimney in the morning. Smoke is an excellent name, Nathaniel approved. Very descriptive. As Sarah continued bonding with the kitten, Nathaniel moved to stand beside Eleanor. She has a gentle touch, he observed quietly. Some children are too rough with animals, but she seems to understand instinctively. She's always loved creatures of all kinds, Eleanor replied, equally soft. William used to tease that she'd fill our house with strays if given half a chance. The memory brought a pang. One of the few pleasant recollections from the latter part of their marriage before gambling consumed William's attention. Would you permit her to keep one of the kittens when they're older? Nathaniel asked. They'll be ready to leave their mother in about a month. Shadow would be happy to have one of her babies, keeping the schoolhouse free of mice. Sarah, overhearing this, looked up with pleading eyes. "Oh, Mama, could we? Please, I'd take such good care of him." Eleanor hesitated. Another mouth to feed, another responsibility. Yet the naked hope in Sarah's expression was impossible to resist. "We'll see," she temporized. "Kittens are a big responsibility." "I could help," Nathaniel offered, "provide food advice on care." His willingness to support Sarah's wish, this small but meaningful effort to bring joy to her daughter's life, touched Eleanor deeply. It seemed that each day revealed another facet of this complex man's character, another reason to appreciate his presence in their lives. "Thank you," she said simply. "We'll discuss it further when the kittens are older." After returning Smoke to his mother, Nathaniel led them to the horse stables. There, he introduced Sarah to Daisy, a gentle chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face. "Would you like to sit on her?" he asked Sarah. "Just while I lead her around the corral. Perfectly safe." Sarah's eyes widened. "Could I really?" "With your mother's permission, of course." Eleanor nodded her consent, and Nathaniel carefully lifted Sarah onto Daisy's back, showing her how to hold the pommel of the small saddle he'd prepared. "Sit tall," he instructed gently. "That's it. Let your legs hang naturally against her sides. Don't worry, I won't let go of the lead rope." As Nathaniel led the mare in slow circles around the corral, Sarah's initial nervousness gave way to delight. Her laughter, a sound too rarely heard since William's death, rang out across the ranch yard, drawing smiles from the ranch hands working nearby. Eleanor leaned against the corral fence, watching the scene with a heart full of conflicting emotions. Gratitude for Nathaniel's kindness, joy at Sarah's happiness, and something deeper, more complicated, a growing awareness of her own feelings toward the reserved rancher who had unexpectedly become such an important presence in their lives. She couldn't deny the fluttering in her chest when he spoke her name, the way her gaze was drawn to him when he wasn't looking, the comfort she found in his steady, reliable presence. These feelings, dormant since William's betrayal and death, were both welcome and terrifying. To care for someone again meant risking pain, risking disappointment. And given her secret, the truth about William's suicide, any deeper relationship would require honesty she wasn't sure she could offer. How could she explain to Nathaniel or anyone that her husband had taken his own life after gambling away their savings? That she had constructed a fiction of his illness to protect Sarah from the truth and herself from scandal? Martha's call to dinner interrupted these troubling thoughts. The meal was spectacular: pot roast with vegetables from the cellar garden, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and apple pie with thick cream for dessert. Sarah ate with obvious enjoyment, her cheeks flushed from her riding adventure. Throughout the meal, Eleanor noticed Martha watching Nathaniel with a fond, almost maternal expression. The housekeeper clearly cared deeply for her employer, and from the respectful way Nathaniel treated her, insisting she join them at the table rather than serve separately, it was evident he regarded her as far more than a mere employee. "Mrs. Martha," Sarah said as she finished her second helping of pie, "why don't you live in town like other ladies? Don't you get lonely out here with just Mr. Hayes?" "Sarah," Eleanor admonished gently, "that's rather personal." But Martha merely chuckled. "It's a fair question, child. No, I don't get lonely. I have my chickens to tend and the house to keep and Mr. Hayes for company, though he's often quiet company." She winked at Nathaniel, who actually smiled slightly in response. "Besides, I lost my husband many years ago, and our children are grown with families of their own in Oregon. Evergreen is my home now." "Like our home is the schoolhouse." Sarah nodded understanding. "But we don't have chickens. Just maybe Smoke soon." This prompted a discussion about proper kitten care with Martha, offering practical advice about feeding and training that had Sarah listening with rapt attention. Later, as they prepared to leave, Nathaniel walked Eleanor to the buggy, while Martha helped Sarah bundle up against the afternoon chill. "Thank you for today," Eleanor said sincerely. "Sarah hasn't been this happy in, well, a very long time." Nathaniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "She's a remarkable child, perceptive, resilient. You've raised her well, especially given the circumstances." "I've done my best," Eleanor replied, "though some days I fear it isn't enough. Children need so much more than just survival." "They need security, stability," Nathaniel agreed. "Things Redemption Creek can provide, despite its rough edges." There was a question in his voice, and Eleanor understood its nature. "Yes, I believe we'll stay. The school term contracts for a year, but I hope to remain longer if the board is satisfied with my teaching." "They will be," he said with quiet certainty. "You have a gift for it." The simple compliment warmed Eleanor more than it should have. "Thank you. That means a great deal coming from you." Nathaniel seemed about to say more when Sarah and Martha emerged from the house. The moment passed, replaced by the practicalities of departure, helping Sarah into the buggy, ensuring they were warmly wrapped in blankets for the journey home. As they drove away, Sarah waved enthusiastically to Nathaniel, who stood watching their departure from the front porch. "I like Evergreen," Sarah declared once they were on the road. "It feels happy, even though it's so big." "Does it?" Eleanor asked, curious about her daughter's perception. Not all the time, I think, but today it was happy." She leaned against Eleanor's side, suddenly thoughtful. "Mama, do you think Mr. Hayes gets sad about his wife and baby like we get sad about Papa?" The question, so innocent yet profound, caught Eleanor off guard. "I imagine he does, sweetheart. Loss stays with us even when we learn to live with it." Sarah nodded solemnly. "That's why his eyes get sad sometimes. But they weren't sad today." No, Eleanor thought they weren't. Today Nathaniel Hayes had seemed more at peace than she'd yet witnessed, as if sharing his home, his animals, his life with them had brought him a measure of contentment. The realization was both comforting and unsettling, because if Nathaniel found happiness in their company, and they in his, then the boundaries she'd carefully maintained since William's death were beginning to blur in ways she wasn't sure she was ready to navigate. Yet, as they returned to town, the memory of Sarah's laughter, of Nathaniel's rare smile, of the simple joy they'd shared at Evergreen Ranch remained. And Eleanor couldn't help but wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, the risk of opening her heart again might be worth the potential reward. If only the shadow of her secrets didn't loom so large between her and any possible future happiness. The following week brought unexpected conflict. Monday morning, Eleanor arrived at the schoolhouse to find Mayor Blackwood waiting for her, his round face flushed with what appeared to be suppressed anger. "Mrs. Morgan," he greeted her stiffly. "A word, if you please." Eleanor sent Sarah inside with her slate, then turned to face the mayor. "Good morning, Mayor Blackwood. How may I help you?" "I understand you've been using water delivered from Evergreen Ranch rather than the school well." His tone made the statement an accusation. "May I ask why?" Eleanor maintained her composure, though her pulse quickened. Mr. Hayes expressed concerns about possible contamination affecting the children's health. Since several students have been ill, it seemed prudent to take precautions. Blackwood's face darkened. "Hayes and his ridiculous theories. There's nothing wrong with the water. He's simply using this manufactured crisis to undermine my mining operation." "I'm not involved in any dispute between you and Mr. Hayes," Eleanor said carefully. "My only concern is the health of my students." "Your concern should be teaching Mrs. Morgan, not spreading unsubstantiated rumors that could damage the town's economy." He stepped closer, his bulk intimidating despite his shorter stature. The school board expects our teacher to demonstrate good judgment and community loyalty. Currently, I question whether you possess either quality. The threat was thinly veiled. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, refusing to be cowed. With all due respect, Mayor, I believe ensuring my students don't fall ill demonstrates both good judgment and community loyalty. If the water is indeed safe, surely testing would confirm that fact and put everyone's minds at ease. Testing has already been done, Blackwood snapped. By qualified experts, not a rancher playing at science. May I see these test results? Eleanor asked, keeping her tone polite but firm. Blackwood's hesitation told her everything. The reports are confidential business documents. The point is, Mrs. Morgan, I expect you to cease this nonsense immediately. Use the school well as generations of teachers and students have done before you. Inside the schoolhouse, Eleanor could see students beginning to arrive. She needed to end this confrontation before it escalated further in front of the children. I understand your position, Mayor Blackwood. I'll give the matter further consideration. It wasn't agreement, merely acknowledgement, but it seemed to mollify him slightly. See that you do. The school board meets next Monday. I'd hate to see your position reviewed so soon after your arrival. With that parting shot, he turned and strode away, nodding curtly to the arriving students. Eleanor took a deep breath, composing herself before entering the schoolhouse. The implicit threat was clear: comply or risk losing her position. Yet she couldn't in good conscience expose the children to potentially contaminated water. Throughout the day, she maintained a cheerful demeanor for her students' sake, but her mind churned with worry. By dismissal time, she had reached a decision. After the last child departed, she penned a brief note to Nathaniel explaining the situation. Clara Thompson, the oldest student, agreed to deliver it to Evergreen Ranch on her way home, as her family's farm lay in that direction. Mr. Hayes visits our farm sometimes, Clara explained as she tucked the note safely in her book satchel. Pa broke his leg last winter, and Mr. Hayes helped set it when Dr. Finch was away delivering babies. He's a good man, no matter what Mrs. Blackwood says. What does Mrs. Blackwood say? Eleanor asked, unable to resist. Clara rolled her eyes in typical teenage fashion. That he's odd and unfriendly, that he thinks he's better than townspeople because of his big ranch. But that's not true at all. He just keeps to himself because he's sad. She shrugged. Everybody knows about his wife and baby dying. My ma says grief changes people. Your mother sounds very wise, Eleanor remarked. She is, Clara agreed simply. She also says Mrs. Blackwood is just sour because her niece Charlotte couldn't catch Mr. Hayes's eye even with all those chance meetings Mrs. Blackwood arranged. The girl grinned mischievously. But he sure notices when you're around Mrs. Morgan. With that parting observation, Clara departed, leaving Eleanor flustered and more confused than ever about her standing in the community. It seemed her connection to Nathaniel Hayes, whatever its nature was, already the subject of town speculation. That evening, as Eleanor helped Sarah with her reading lesson at Rebecca's dining table, a knock sounded at the front door. Rebecca answered it, and moments later Nathaniel entered the dining room, removing his hat as he did so. Mrs. Morgan, he greeted her formally, though his eyes held concern. I received your message. Mr. Hayes, Eleanor acknowledged, aware of Rebecca's interested gaze. Thank you for coming. Sarah, please continue your reading while I speak with Mr. Hayes in the parlor. Once they were alone, Nathaniel's formal demeanor softened slightly. Blackwood threatened your position. That's unacceptable. He was quite clear about the consequences if I continue using your water rather than the school well, Eleanor confirmed. Yet I can't in good conscience expose the children to potential harm. Nor should you, Nathaniel agreed grimly. I've sent water samples to a laboratory in Helena. We should have scientific confirmation within days. That may be too late. The school board meets Monday. Eleanor paced the small parlor tension evident in every line of her body. If I defy the mayor openly, I risk losing my position. Yet, if children become ill because I comply— Eleanor. Nathaniel's use of her first name stopped her pacing. This isn't your battle to fight alone. I've already written to the territorial health inspector and the mining commissioner. Blackwood's operation lacks proper safeguards required by law. But until officials respond, the immediate problem remains. Eleanor sighed, frustration evident. What would you do if you were in my position? Nathaniel considered the question seriously. I would find a middle path. Don't openly defy Blackwood, but don't compromise the children's safety either. How? Continue using the delivered water, but be discreet about it. Tell Blackwood you're complying if he asks directly. Sometimes temporary deception serves a greater good. Eleanor studied him, surprised by the pragmatic advice. I didn't expect you to suggest subterfuge. A shadow of a smile crossed his face. During the war, I once smuggled medical supplies past Confederate lines by hiding them in coffins supposedly containing our dead. When principles and rules conflict, one must choose principles. This glimpse into his past, his resourcefulness, his moral compass fascinated Eleanor. Each revelation about Nathaniel Hayes added depth to her understanding of him, like pieces of a complex puzzle gradually forming a clearer picture. Thank you, she said sincerely, for the advice and for standing with me in this matter. Always, he replied simply, the single word carrying a weight of promise that both comforted and unsettled her. A comfortable silence fell between them. Then, seemingly impulsively, Nathaniel spoke again. There's a social gathering in 2 weeks, a winter dance at the Grange Hall. Would you consider attending with Sarah, of course? The invitation caught Eleanor completely off guard. A dance I'm not sure that would be wise, given the current situation with Mayor Blackwood. Perhaps that's precisely why it would be wise, Nathaniel countered. Show the community you're committed to becoming part of it. Many influential residents will attend people whose support could counterbalance Blackwood's disapproval. His reasoning was sound, yet Eleanor sensed there was more to the invitation than strategic community relations. The slight tension in his posture, the careful way he awaited her response, suggested personal investment in her answer. I'll consider it, she said finally. Thank you for the invitation. Nathaniel nodded, accepting her non-committal response with grace. I should take my leave. It's growing late. He reached for his hat, then paused. Whatever you decide about the dance, know that you're not alone in this situation, Eleanor. I won't let Blackwood threaten your position because you chose to protect your students. The quiet certainty in his voice sent a wave of emotion through Eleanor. Gratitude, yes, but also a deepening awareness of her feelings toward this complex, honorable man. In the short time since their paths had crossed in that blizzard, Nathaniel Hayes had become someone she trusted implicitly, someone whose opinion mattered, someone whose presence in her life felt increasingly essential. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. As she watched him depart from Rebecca's front window, Eleanor wondered what William would think of the man who had so unexpectedly become their champion in Redemption Creek. Would he approve? Would he understand the conflicted feelings stirring in her heart? More importantly, what would Nathaniel think if he knew the truth about William's death? The question haunted her, a persistent shadow over every interaction with the honorable man who seemed to value honesty above all else. Some secrets, Eleanor reflected sadly, grew heavier with each passing day, no matter how necessary they might have seemed at the start. I'll revise and condense my response to meet the 6,000-word target without losing essential content. Here's my recommendation. The dawn light had barely crept over the horizon when Eleanor left Rebecca's boarding house. She had spent a restless night considering what might have driven Nathaniel to the mine after their perfect evening at the dance. The mystery only deepened her resolve to uncover the truth. She had arranged for Sarah to remain with Rebecca for the morning, explaining only that she needed to investigate something important. The less Sarah knew of Nathaniel's arrest, the better. The path to Blackwood's mine wound through pine-covered hills northwest of town. Eleanor rode Rebecca's gentle mare, grateful for the quiet companionship as her thoughts raced ahead. What could Nathaniel have been seeking? What evidence might remain that could help him? The mine operations came into view, a sprawling wooden structure built into the hillside, with cart tracks emerging from a dark entrance. Several workers moved about, preparing for the day's labor. At the edge of the clearing stood a small office building where Eleanor assumed she might find records, or perhaps the night watchman who had apprehended Nathaniel. She dismounted at a distance, tethering the horse to a tree, then approached on foot. Her heart pounded with each step, but she maintained her composure. She was simply a concerned teacher investigating the water source. Affecting her students, a plausible explanation should anyone question her presence. "Ma'am, this area is restricted," a gruff voice called as she neared the office. A bearded man in dusty work clothes stepped into her path. Eleanor summoned her most authoritative teaching voice. "Good morning, I'm Mrs. Morgan, the schoolteacher. I'm here regarding the water contamination issue that's been making the town's children ill. I need to speak with someone in charge of operations." The man's expression shifted from suspicion to wariness. "Foreman's not here yet. Mr. Blackwood's orders are clear. No visitors without his approval." "I understand," Eleanor replied calmly, though disappointment coursed through her. She noticed a younger man watching them from near the office door, barely more than a boy with anxious eyes. "Perhaps one of the night watchmen could assist me. I understand there was an incident last night." The bearded man's face hardened. "That's none of your concern, ma'am. Best you head back to town now." But the younger man stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Green, I could show Mrs. Morgan the water drainage system. Might help her understand why the school well couldn't possibly be affected by our operations." The older man, Green, considered this, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine. 15 minutes, Billy. Then escort her off the property." As Green stalked away, the young man approached Eleanor with an apologetic smile. "Billy Wilson, ma'am. The mayor's nephew." Eleanor hid her surprise at the connection. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Wilson." Billy led her around the main building, speaking in a rapid, nervous cadence. "Been working here 3 months now. Good wages, better than farm work. Uncle George gave me the night watch position last week." Eleanor seized the opening. "So you were here last night when Mr. Hayes was apprehended." Billy's steps faltered. He glanced around before answering in a lowered voice. "Yes, ma'am, me and Jim Peterson." "Could you tell me what happened? Exactly as you saw it." Billy hesitated, conflict evident in his youthful face. "I shouldn't." "Mr. Wilson," Eleanor pressed gently. "Nathaniel Hayes is a respected member of this community, a former doctor who's saved countless lives. If he's been falsely accused, wouldn't you want the truth known?" The young man's shoulders slumped. "It wasn't like they said. Jim and I were playing cards in the office, not supposed to, but the nights get long. Heard someone in the records room. Found Mr. Hayes looking through papers in Uncle George's desk." "Was he damaging anything?" "No, ma'am, just reading." When Jim confronted him, Mr. Hayes tried to explain, but Jim wouldn't listen. There was a scuffle when Jim tried to grab him. Uncle George arrived soon after, almost like he was expecting trouble. He's the one who claimed Mr. Hayes was tampering with mining equipment, but I never saw anything like that. Eleanor's mind raced. What kind of papers was Mr. Hayes examining? Correspondence looked like. I glimpsed a St. Louis address on one letter before Uncle George locked everything away. St. Louis. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. What connection could Blackwood have to her former home? "One more thing, Mrs. Morgan," Billy added, lowering his voice further. "Mr. Hayes said something strange when Uncle George accused him. Said he knew what George was hiding and who he was protecting. Said it had to stop." A shout from the main building interrupted them. Green was gesturing impatiently. "I need to go," Billy said apologetically. "Please don't tell anyone what I said. I need this job." "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. You've been very helpful." As Eleanor rode back toward town, her thoughts whirled with this new information. Nathaniel had been searching for documents, not sabotaging equipment. Documents with a St. Louis connection. And somehow Mayor Blackwood was protecting someone Nathaniel knew about. The pieces refused to align into a coherent picture. But Eleanor felt certain the truth involved her past in St. Louis. Perhaps even William. When she returned to the boarding house, Rebecca was waiting anxiously. "Any luck at the mine?" Eleanor shared what she'd learned from Billy Wilson while Sarah played upstairs. Rebecca's expression grew increasingly troubled. "St. Louis connections? That can't be coincidence." "I need to see Nathaniel again," Eleanor decided. "He has to tell me the truth." "The marshal won't allow another visit until tomorrow," Rebecca cautioned. "But there might be another way to find answers. Have you checked Nathaniel's medical bag? He left it here when he treated Sarah's illness." Eleanor frowned. "I couldn't invade his privacy." "Sometimes privacy must yield to necessity," Rebecca countered. "If Nathaniel is protecting you from something, don't you deserve to know what?" The black leather bag still sat on the high shelf in Eleanor's room where she'd placed it after Sarah's recovery. With reluctant hands, she brought it down and placed it on the bed. "This feels wrong," she murmured. "What feels wrong is Nathaniel sitting in jail while you remain ignorant of whatever danger threatens you both," Rebecca replied firmly. With a deep breath, Eleanor opened the bag. Inside were the expected medical instruments and medicines neatly organized. Nothing unusual presented itself until she removed the false bottom of the bag, a clever hiding place containing a worn leather-bound journal and several folded papers. Eleanor's hand trembled as she opened the journal. The handwriting on the first page stopped her breath. "Property of Dr. Nathaniel Hayes, 47th Regiment, Union Army Medical Corps." She turned the pages slowly. Most contained medical observations from Nathaniel's war service notes on treatments, patient outcomes, supply shortages. Then, halfway through, a name leapt from the page. October 17th, 1864, Seattle. William Morgan admitted with gunshot wound to right shoulder. Extraction successful. Patient displays good humor despite circumstances. Speaks often of wife Eleanor and hopes for family after the war. Eleanor sank onto the bed, the journal clutched in trembling hands. William had been Nathaniel's patient during the war. They had known each other. She continued reading, finding several more entries about William's recovery, his conversations with Nathaniel, his eventual return to duty. The final entry regarding William was dated March 1865, noting his discharge and return to civilian life. The loose papers were more recent. Letters, mostly including one from William dated January 17, 1876, just one day before his death. Eleanor's heart pounded as she unfolded it. My dear friend Nathaniel, by the time you read this, I will likely be gone. The decisions I've made have led me down a path from which I can see no honorable exit. The debts I've accumulated cannot be repaid. The men to whom I owe have made it clear they will collect from my family should I fail to satisfy my obligations. I write to you not for myself, but for Eleanor and Sarah. They know nothing of my gambling, of the loans, of the desperate measures I've taken. I've maintained the fiction of business reversals, but the truth is far more shameful. You once saved my life on a battlefield far from home. Today, I ask you to save something more precious, my family's future. If you can find them, protect them from the consequences of my weakness. These men will not cease their pursuit simply because I am gone. Eleanor plans to tell everyone I died of consumption. Let her maintain this deception if it brings her peace. She is stronger than she knows, with a spirit that deserves far better than the husband I became. I have enclosed what information I have on my creditors. Chief among them is George Blackwood, who operates now in Montana Territory. He has extended my loans at ruinous rates, knowing I cannot pay, using me to launder money from his less reputable enterprises. He will recognize Eleanor's name should your paths ever cross. I have no right to ask anything of you. Yet, I implore you as the honorable man I once knew, help them if you can. With deepest regret and gratitude, William Morgan. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as she finished reading. The truth she had concealed for 18 months. William's suicide. His gambling debts had been known to Nathaniel all along. He had come to Redemption Creek not by coincidence, but with purpose, to fulfill a promise to a dying friend. The other papers confirmed William's claims. Notes on Blackwood's operations, evidence of money laundering, and most damning, a list of men still seeking repayment of William's debts, men who wouldn't hesitate to pressure his widow and child. Now Nathaniel's cryptic behavior made sense. His reluctance to explain his presence at Blackwood's mine was to protect Eleanor from the truth. He had been gathering evidence of Blackwood's illegal activities, evidence that might free Eleanor from the shadow of William's debts while bringing the corrupt mayor to justice. Mama, why are you crying? Eleanor looked up to find Sarah standing in the doorway, concern etched on her small face. She hastily wiped her tears. Just remembering Papa, she said, not entirely untruthfully. Sarah crossed to the bed, climbing up beside her. I remember him too. Not as much anymore, but sometimes. She reached for her ever-present rag doll, the one William had given her before his death. He gave me Mrs. Button. He said she would keep me safe when he couldn't. Eleanor stroked her daughter's hair. That's a lovely memory. Mrs. Button has a secret, Sarah confided suddenly. Papa showed me. A secret? Sarah nodded solemnly. A special pocket inside, for treasures. She turned the doll over, revealing an opening in the seam along its back. See? With careful fingers, Sarah reached inside the doll and extracted a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. I keep this here. It's from Papa. Eleanor accepted the paper with trembling hands. It was a letter written in William's familiar script, addressed to Sarah for When She's Older. Dated January 17, 1876, the same day he had written to Nathaniel. Have you read this? Eleanor asked gently. Sarah shook her head. I can't read Papa's writing yet, but I know it's important. Would you like me to read it to you now? Sarah considered this solemnly, then nodded. Eleanor unfolded the paper and began reading aloud, her voice soft with emotion. My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, you have grown into the thoughtful young lady I always knew you would become. I write these words with a heavy heart, knowing I may not be there to see you grow up. There is much I wish I could explain that you are too young to understand now. The most important thing to know is that I love you and your mother more than anything in this world. The choices I've made were mine alone, never a reflection on either of you. If I could give you one piece of advice for your life, it would be this: always be honest with those you love. Secrets and lies, even those we tell to protect others, create walls that love cannot easily penetrate. If someday a man named Nathaniel Hayes comes into your life, trust him. He is the finest man I've ever known. Brave, honest, and true to his word. He saved my life once, but more importantly, he showed me what it means to live with honor. I hope you will remember me, not for my failings, but for the love I bear you. You have been my greatest joy, Sarah, my brightest star in the darkest night. With endless love, your Papa. Silence filled the room when Eleanor finished reading. Sarah's small hand crept into hers, offering comfort, even as she absorbed this message from her father. I knew Mr. Hayes was special, Sarah said finally. Papa said so. Eleanor gathered her daughter into her arms, holding her close. Yes, sweetheart, he is very special indeed. She kissed the top of Sarah's head. And tomorrow, we're going to help him. The next morning, Eleanor requested another visit with Nathaniel, this time bringing Sarah along. The marshal, seeing the child's earnest face, relented to a brief family visit. Nathaniel looked exhausted, but managed to smile when he saw them approach his cell. Miss Sarah, this is an unexpected pleasure. Mr. Hayes, Sarah greeted him solemnly. Papa said I should trust you. Nathaniel's eyes widened, then shifted to Eleanor with a question in them. We know everything, Nathaniel, Eleanor said quietly. William's letter to you, his gambling debts, Blackwood's involvement. She hesitated. Why didn't you tell me? Nathaniel sighed, moving closer to the bars. At first I wasn't certain you were the same Eleanor Morgan. William's letter mentioned St. Louis, but I had no way to know if you'd relocated there after the war. When Rebecca wrote about a widowed teacher from St. Louis arriving with her daughter, I wondered but couldn't be sure. And after you found us in the blizzard, surely you knew then. Yes, but by then I'd seen how hard you were working to protect Sarah from the truth, to build a new life based on respectability and independence. I couldn't bring myself to destroy that by revealing William's secrets. So instead, you carried the burden alone, Eleanor said softly, watching over us, protecting us from dangers we didn't even know existed. Nathaniel shrugged the gesture dismissive of his own sacrifice. I made a promise to William and to myself. He added, his green eyes intent on hers. When I realized who you were that night at the ranch, something changed. What began as an obligation became personal. Eleanor felt tears threatening again. The water contamination, was that real, or just a way to oppose Blackwood? Very real, Nathaniel assured her. I would never risk children's health, even to bring down a criminal like Blackwood. But when I discovered his mining operation was causing illness, it provided an opportunity to investigate him more thoroughly. And what were you looking for at the mine last night? Nathaniel glanced at Sarah, who was listening intently. Evidence connecting Blackwood to certain individuals in St. Louis. Men who might still pose a threat to you both. You found it, Eleanor guessed. That's why he had you arrested on false charges. I found enough, Nathaniel confirmed. Names, dates, correspondence that proves Blackwood is still in communication with William's creditors. That he's been watching you since you arrived, reporting your whereabouts. A chill ran through Eleanor at the thought of being observed, evaluated by unseen enemies. That's why you've been so protective. You knew they might come for us. I believe Blackwood convinced them to wait to see if you might have access to money or valuables they could claim. Your teaching position made you seem more respectable, worth more to them, alive and working, than— He trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought with Sarah present. What happens now? Eleanor asked. The circuit judge arrives tomorrow. With the evidence I've gathered, plus testimony from Billy Wilson about what really happened at the mine, Blackwood will face serious charges. Billy spoke with you. Nathaniel looked surprised. I visited the mine yesterday, Eleanor admitted. He confirmed you weren't tampering with equipment, just searching through papers. Nathaniel's expression softened. You investigated on my behalf. Of course I did, Eleanor replied simply. You've done so much for us. Did you think I would simply accept Blackwood's lies about you? Mr. Hayes, Sarah interrupted, holding up her rag doll. Papa left you a message and Mrs. Button, too. Nathaniel looked confused as Sarah reached into the doll's hidden pocket and withdrew a small key. He said it opens something important. Comprehension dawned on Nathaniel's face. The strong box. William mentioned a safe deposit box in his letter, but said the key was hidden somewhere only his daughter would know. Sarah beamed proudly. I kept it safe, just like Papa said. Marshal Peterson approached, indicating their time was up. Eleanor gathered Sarah's hand, promising Nathaniel they would return the next day with the judge. As they turned to leave, Nathaniel called softly, Eleanor. She looked back. Thank you, he said, for trusting me with the truth about William. I know how difficult that must have been. It seems we've both been keeping secrets to protect each other, she replied. Perhaps it's time for a new beginning, one built on honesty. His eyes held hers. I'd like that very much. The following day brought dramatic changes to Redemption Creek. Judge Franklin Howard arrived on the morning stage, a stern man with shrewd eyes and a reputation for fairness. Eleanor waited anxiously outside the town hall where the hearing would take place, Sarah's hand clasped tightly in hers. Rebecca joined them, offering moral support. The whole town's talking about Blackwood's arrest this morning. Seems the marshal found some incriminating evidence in his home after Billy Wilson came forward. Before Eleanor could respond, Martha Sullivan approached, her usually immaculate appearance showing signs of haste and worry. Mrs. Morgan, I came as soon as I heard what was happening. Is it true? Did Nathaniel know your husband during the war? Yes, Eleanor confirmed, seeing no reason to hide the truth any longer. They served together. William was Nathaniel's patient after being wounded. Martha nodded thoughtfully. That explains so much. All these years I wondered what drove him to leave his medical practice to isolate himself at Evergreen. It wasn't just losing Caroline and James. There was something more he was waiting for. She squeezed Eleanor's hand. I'm glad he found you both. The town hall doors opened, and people began filing inside. Eleanor, Sarah, and Rebecca found seats near the front where they could see Nathaniel being brought in by Marshal Peterson. Despite his wrinkled clothing and the stubble darkening his jaw, he carried himself with dignity, his gaze immediately finding Eleanor's. Mayor Blackwood sat at a separate table, his usual bluster replaced by tense silence. His wife was notably absent. Judge Howard called the court to order examining the charges against Nathaniel first. Billy Wilson's testimony about what truly occurred at the mine, supported by the mining records Nathaniel had been examining, quickly established his innocence of vandalism or sabotage. When Nathaniel took the stand, he presented his evidence methodically. Documents proving Blackwood's involvement with criminal elements in St. Louis, his use of the mining operation to launder money, and most damning his knowledge of and participation in the threats against William Morgan's family. "Your Honor," Nathaniel explained, "Mayor Blackwood recognized Mrs. Morgan's name when she arrived in Redemption Creek. Instead of revealing his connection to her late husband's creditors, he pretended ignorance while secretly reporting her whereabouts to men who wished to collect debts through intimidation or worse." "And your interest in this matter, Dr. Hayes?" the judge inquired, using Nathaniel's medical title rather than Mr. Nathaniel hesitated, glancing at Eleanor before answering. "William Morgan was under my care during the war. Before his death, he asked for my help protecting his family. I gave my word." Judge Howard studied him thoughtfully. "A promise that led you to investigate the mayor's criminal activities at considerable personal risk." "Yes, Your Honor." "And Mrs. Morgan, was she aware of this connection?" "Not until yesterday," Nathaniel admitted. "I believed it better she not know the danger while establishing herself here." The judge nodded, then called Eleanor to testify. With steady voice, she confirmed William's suicide following gambling debts and explained her decision to describe his death as resulting from illness. "I wanted to protect Sarah from the truth," she explained, "and to escape the scandal that would have followed us in St. Louis." "A understandable choice for a mother," Judge Howard acknowledged. "And now, Mrs. Morgan, having learned of Mayor Blackwood's actions and Dr. Hayes's intervention on your behalf, what are your wishes regarding this matter?" Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "I wish for justice, Your Honor, for the truth to be known, however difficult. My husband made terrible mistakes, but his family should not pay for them indefinitely. And the man who has protected us at great personal cost deserves to be free of false charges." The judge's verdict came swiftly. Nathaniel was cleared of all charges. Mayor Blackwood was remanded to territorial authorities for trial on multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and criminal conspiracy. The evidence would also be shared with authorities in St. Louis, potentially clearing William's outstanding debts through evidence of usury and illegal lending practices. As the hearing concluded, Eleanor found herself surrounded by supportive townspeople. Mrs. Thompson with kind words, Dr. Finch offering congratulations, even Judith Blackwood approaching with stiff formality to distance herself from her husband's actions. Through it all, Eleanor's gaze kept returning to Nathaniel, who stood conversing with the judge. When he finally made his way to her side, the crowd parted naturally. "It seems you've been exonerated," Eleanor said, smiling up at him. "As have you," he replied. "Judge Howard assures me the evidence is more than sufficient to invalidate any claims against William's estate. You and Sarah are truly free now." "Thanks to you." Nathaniel shook his head. "I merely kept a promise. You did the hard work of building a new life. Speaking of which," Eleanor said, suddenly uncertain, "what happens now, with the school, with—" She gestured vaguely between them. "That," Nathaniel said quietly, "depends entirely on you." Sarah, who had been unusually patient throughout the proceedings, tugged at Eleanor's skirt. "Can we go home now, Mama? Mrs. Button is tired." "Of course, sweetheart." But as Eleanor prepared to leave, she realized she wasn't certain where home was anymore. The boarding house, the school quarters, neither felt quite right after all that had happened. As if reading her thoughts, Nathaniel spoke. "Perhaps you both might consider visiting Evergreen for a few days to rest and recover from these events." Eleanor hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I think we'd like that very much." Spring came to Montana with gentle persistence, melting snow from the valleys, while the distant mountains remained white-capped against clear blue skies. At Evergreen Ranch, the transformation was evident in new foals testing wobbly legs in the corral, fresh green shoots in Martha's garden, and Sarah's delighted discovery of wildflowers in the meadow behind the barn. Eleanor watched from the porch as Nathaniel led her daughter on a careful exploration of a robin's nest. His tall frame bent protectively over Sarah's small one while they observed the blue eggs from a respectful distance. 3 months had passed since the dramatic events of the hearing. Mayor Blackwood now awaited trial in the territorial capital, his mining operation shut down pending environmental remediation. Redemption Creek had elected Reverend Parker as interim mayor, bringing a welcome calm to town governance. The school continued under Eleanor's direction, though she now made the daily journey from Evergreen Ranch rather than living in the teachers' quarters. What had begun as a temporary visit had extended naturally, neither she nor Nathaniel discussing the arrangement beyond practical considerations of transportation and schedules. Sarah had blossomed in the expansive freedom of ranch life. She had claimed one of Shadow's kittens, the gray one she'd named Smoke, who now followed her everywhere. She helped Martha gather eggs each morning, took riding lessons from Nathaniel every afternoon, and slept more peacefully than she had since William's death. As for Eleanor herself, the transformation was more internal. The burden of secrets lifted, she found herself laughing more easily, dreaming more freely, and most surprising of all, falling in love, with deliberate, clear-eyed certainty. Nathaniel approached the porch, Sarah skipping ahead with a clutch of wildflowers in her hand. "Mama, look what we found." She thrust the bouquet forward proudly. "Mr. Nathaniel says they're called shooting stars, but they don't really shoot anywhere." "They're beautiful," Eleanor assured her, accepting the slightly crushed flowers. "Perfect for our dinner table tonight." "Can I show them to Martha? She's teaching me how to press flowers in books." "Of course, sweetheart." As Sarah dashed inside, Nathaniel took a seat beside Eleanor on the porch swing. They sat in comfortable silence, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "I received a letter from Judge Howard today," Nathaniel said eventually. "The claims against William's estate have been officially invalidated. The men involved are facing charges in St. Louis." Eleanor sighed with relief. "So it's truly over." "Yes." He hesitated, then added, "which means you and Sarah are free to go wherever you choose. Stay in Redemption Creek, return to St. Louis, or start fresh somewhere else entirely." Eleanor turned to study his profile. "Are you suggesting we should leave?" "No," he answered quickly, meeting her gaze. "Quite the opposite. But I want you to know your choice is truly your own, now, not compelled by circumstance or obligation." Eleanor smiled. "And if my choice is to stay here at Evergreen?" Something kindled in Nathaniel's eyes, hope carefully restrained. "Then I would be the happiest man in Montana Territory." "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Eleanor said, her heart quickening. "That day in the general store when you first met Sarah, you told her she wasn't alone, that she had you. Did you already suspect who we were then?" "I had my suspicions," Nathaniel admitted. "But that's not why I said it." "No. No." He took her hand gently. "I said it because I saw a little girl in pain, and I couldn't bear it. Because in that moment I knew I would do anything to protect her and you, whether you were William's family or not." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You've more than kept your promise to him. You have given us a home, safety, happiness." "Eleanor," Nathaniel interrupted softly, "what I've done was never just about a promise to William. From the moment I found you in that blizzard, something changed in me. After losing Caroline and James, I never thought I could feel this way again, never wanted to risk that kind of loss. And now," Eleanor whispered, Now I can't imagine my life without you and Sarah in it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment, for you to be truly free to choose." Eleanor's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a gold ring with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Eleanor Morgan, I love you. I love Sarah as if she were my own daughter. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy swept through Eleanor, pure and uncomplicated. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, Nathaniel Hayes. I will marry you." His smile, a full, unrestrained smile that transformed his serious face, was her reward as he slipped the ring onto her finger. When he leaned forward to kiss her, Eleanor met him halfway, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude for this unexpected second chance at happiness. "Mama, Mr. Nathaniel!" Sarah's excited voice broke them apart as she burst onto the porch. "Martha says—" She stopped abruptly, noticing their clasped hands and Eleanor's tearful smile. Her gaze dropped to the ring now adorning her mother's finger, and her eyes widened with comprehension beyond her years. "Are you going to be my papa now for real?" she asked Nathaniel directly. He held out his arm and Sarah ran into his embrace. "If that would be all right with you," he said gently. Sarah nodded against his chest. "Papa said you were the finest man he ever knew. He was right." Eleanor watched them, her family coming together in a way she could never have imagined 18 months ago, when she'd fled St. Louis, burdened with grief and secrets. Life's path had led her not to the independence she'd thought she wanted, but to something far more precious, a love built on truth, sacrifice, and mutual respect. "When will you get married?" Sarah asked, practically looking between them. "Soon," Nathaniel promised. "Though your mother may want time to plan, next Sunday," Eleanor interrupted decisively. "After church. Nothing elaborate, just those we care about most." Nathaniel's eyebrows rose in surprise. "So soon?" "I've learned that life is unpredictable, Nathaniel. When you find happiness, you should embrace it with both hands." She leaned forward to kiss him again, briefly but tenderly. "Besides, we've waited long enough, don't you think?" The wedding took place exactly as Eleanor had specified, a simple ceremony in Redemption Creek's white church on a perfect spring Sunday. Rebecca served as her attendant, while Dr. Finch stood with Nathaniel. Sarah, dressed in a new blue dress that matched her mother's wedding gown, proudly carried the rings on a small satin pillow, Smoke the kitten trailing behind her down the aisle to everyone's amusement. Martha had prepared a wedding feast at Evergreen Ranch, where the entire town gathered to celebrate. Even Judith Blackwood attended, subdued but seemingly sincere in her congratulations. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the ranch yard where neighbors and friends danced to fiddle music, Eleanor found herself watching Sarah. Her daughter sat on the porch steps beside Clara Thompson, both girls giggling as they shared some secret joke. Sarah's face, once so often solemn with unspoken grief, now shone with carefree happiness. "She's flourishing," Nathaniel observed, appearing at Eleanor's side with 2 cups of punch. "Like a flower finally receiving proper sunlight." "Thanks to you," Eleanor said, accepting the cup and leaning naturally into his side. "Thanks to us," he corrected gently. "And to her own resilient spirit." "I've been thinking about William's letter," Eleanor said after a moment. "About his advice to Sarah to always be honest with those she loves." Nathaniel nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I carried my secret about his death like a shield, thinking it protected us. But it also isolated us, prevented us from truly connecting with others." She looked up at her new husband, marveling at the word even in her thoughts. "Until you." "We all do what seems necessary in the moment," Nathaniel said, William included. His final act was both desperate and loving, a flawed attempt to protect you and Sarah from his mistakes. "I think he would be happy knowing how things turned out," Eleanor said softly. "Knowing Sarah has a father again, knowing we found you." "I think he would," Nathaniel agreed, his arm tightening around her waist. "And knowing the kind of mother you've been to Sarah, strong, determined, loving, he would be proud of you, Eleanor." The simple words spoken with such conviction healed something deep within her that Eleanor hadn't even realized was still wounded. The guilt she had carried about her deception, about her inability to save William from himself, eased beneath the gentle understanding in Nathaniel's eyes. "Mrs. Hayes," Martha called from the porch, "time to cut the wedding cake." Eleanor smiled at the new name, linking her arm through Nathaniel's. "Shall we, Dr. Hayes?" "With pleasure, Mrs. Hayes." As they walked toward the gathering of friends and neighbors, Eleanor felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The journey that had begun in desperation, a widow and her daughter fleeing painful truths, had led through hardship and deception to this moment of perfect clarity. Sometimes, she reflected, the most difficult paths led to the most beautiful destinations. And sometimes, a promise made in darkness could bloom into unexpected joy in the light of a new day. 5 years later, Eleanor sat on the porch of Evergreen Ranch, a leather-bound journal open on her lap, as she recorded the day's events. The ranch had flourished under their joint stewardship, expanding to include a small medical clinic where Nathaniel now practiced part-time, providing care for remote homesteads that Dr. Finch couldn't easily reach. Eleanor continued teaching, though she had trained Clara Thompson as her assistant. The young woman now handled most daily lessons, allowing Eleanor more time with her growing family. From her vantage point, she could see Sarah, now 10, confidently leading her 3-year-old brother Thomas on a gentle pony around the corral. Sarah had grown tall and graceful, her dark curls and serious expression reminiscent of William, though her laugh, now heard frequently, was entirely her own. Thomas, with his father's green eyes and quiet determination, followed his sister's instructions with unusual patience for a child his age. Already he showed interest in Nathaniel's medical books, solemnly announcing his intention to be a doctor like Papa when he grew up. In Eleanor's arms, 2-month-old Emma slept peacefully, her tiny hand between one curled around her mother's finger. She had arrived after a difficult pregnancy that had tested Nathaniel's medical skills and Eleanor's strength, making her all the more precious to them both. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Eleanor's attention. Nathaniel returned from his medical rounds, his tall figure relaxed in the saddle. He dismounted with fluid grace that belied his 41 years, securing his horse before climbing the porch steps to join his family. "How are my girls?" he asked, pressing a kiss to Eleanor's forehead before gently stroking Emma's downy head. "Perfect," Eleanor replied, shifting to make room for him on the swing beside her. "How was Mrs. Jenkins?" "Recovering well. The twins are strong and healthy." He settled beside her, his arm naturally finding its place around her shoulders. "Sarah seems to be giving another riding lesson." Eleanor smiled, watching their children in the golden afternoon light. "She's a born teacher. Thomas hangs on her every word. Like mother, like daughter," Nathaniel observed. They sat in companionable silence, the gentle creaking of the porch swing matching the rhythm of their shared breaths. After a moment, Nathaniel reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Happy anniversary," he said, placing it in her free hand. Eleanor looked at him in surprise. "That's next week." "I know. Consider this an early gift." Curious, she unwrapped the package to reveal a wooden whistle carved in the shape of a bird, exactly like the one he had given Sarah 5 years earlier. For Emma, he explained, when she's older, to continue the tradition. Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes at the simple, thoughtful gesture. You're a sentimental man, Nathaniel Hayes, despite that serious exterior. Only with you, he admitted, his green eyes warm with love. Only with my family. Family. The word encompassed so much: the children they were raising together, the home they had built, the trust and love that had grown between them. It included memories of William and Caroline and James honoring those lost while embracing the present. It stretched forward into a future bright with possibility. I love you, Eleanor said simply. And I love you, Nathaniel replied, his deep voice rich with emotion. More than I ever thought possible. As the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold, Eleanor leaned her head against her husband's shoulder. Sarah's laughter rang out as Thomas managed to steer the pony independently for the first time. Emma stirred against her mother's chest, making small, contented noises. This, Eleanor thought, was what William had wanted for them: safety, love, a chance to begin again. And what Nathaniel had needed, after his own losses, a family to heal his wounded heart. What they had all found together against improbable odds was a love strong enough to overcome secrets, grief, and fear. A promise made in desperation had led to a life filled with joy. And that, perhaps, was the greatest blessing of all.